Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving deep into the most mysterious, haunting, and utterly terrifying secrets that our oceans hold. From ancient creatures that shouldn't exist to ships that vanish without explanation. From underwater cities lost to time to sounds so horrifying, they've kept scientists awake at night. The ocean covers over 70% of our planet, yet we've explored less than 5% of it. That means there's a whole world down there waiting in the darkness filled with mysteries that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant bedtime stories. So before we descend into these watery depths together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy diving into the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join us on these midnight journeys into the abyss. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the ocean's darkest secrets. When you think of the ocean, you might picture sunny beaches, gentle waves, and maybe a dolphin or two jumping playfully in the distance. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to the places where light has never touched, where pressure would crush you in milliseconds, and where things live that evolution seems to have forgotten about. The ocean isn't just water. It's a three-dimensional alien world that exists right here on our planet, filled with creatures so bizarre they look like they were designed by someone having a particularly strange dream. It's a realm where fish have their own built-in flashlights, where giant squids battle whales in epic underwater wars, and where the very geography itself seems to shift and change like a living thing. Picture this. You're floating on the surface of the ocean on a calm night. The water is black glass, reflecting stars you can barely make out. But beneath you, stretching down for miles and miles, is an abyss so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest into some parts of it, the peak wouldn't even come close to reaching the surface. And in that darkness, things are moving. Things are hunting. Things are waiting. The ocean doesn't care about your fears or your comfort zone. It operates by rules so alien to our land-dwelling minds that even our most advanced science struggles to understand them. Down there in the deepest trenches, the pressure is over 1,000 times greater than what you experience sitting in your room right now. It would be like having the weight of 50 jumbo jets pressing down on every square inch of your body. And yet life thrives there. Not just survives, thrives. Creatures that have never seen sunlight, that have never felt warmth, that exist in the world of eternal midnight and crushing cold. They've adapted to conditions so extreme that they might as well be living on another planet entirely. Some of them glow with their own eerie light, creating constellations of bioluminescence in the absolute darkness. Others have evolved to be transparent, like living ghosts drifting through the water. But here's what really keeps oceanographers up at night. We keep finding new things down there. New species, new ecosystems, new mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. Every deep-sea expedition brings back footage of creatures that look like they crawled out of someone's fever dream. And for every new discovery, 10 more questions arise. The ocean has been keeping secrets for billions of years, and it's not about to give them up easily. It guards its mysteries jealously, hidden beneath miles of dark water and crushing pressure. But tonight we're going to dive down into that alien world and explore some of the most spine-tingling, sleep-disrupting, absolutely fascinating mysteries that lurk in the depths. Because if you think you know what's scary, wait until you hear about what's been living in the deepest parts of our planet's oceans, right beneath our feet. All this time, and the really unsettling part, we're just beginning to scratch the surface. Let's start our journey in a place that sounds like it came straight out of a horror movie, the Mariana Trench. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, this underwater canyon is the deepest known part of Earth's oceans, plunging down over 36,000 feet below sea level. To put that in perspective, if you could somehow drain all the water out of the Mariana Trench and drop Mount Everest into it, the mountain's peak would still be over a mile underwater. The Mariana Trench isn't just deep, it's alien. The pressure down there is so intense that it would instantly crush any human body into something resembling chunky soup. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and there's no sunlight, no warmth, no comfort of any kind. It's as close to visiting another planet as you can get, without leaving Earth. And yet, against all odds, life exists down there. In 2012, filmmaker James Cameron descended to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in a specially designed submersible called the Deep Sea Challenger. He described the experience as being like visiting another planet, a desolate, alien landscape where the pressure would kill a human in seconds if their vessel failed. But what's truly chilling is what scientists have discovered living in this impossible environment. Creatures that defy our understanding of what life should be capable of. There's the Mariana snailfish, a translucent, ghostly fish that somehow withstands pressure equivalent to an elephant standing on your thumb. There are bizarre amphipods like alien shrimp that grow to unusual sizes, scavenging on whatever meager nutrients drift down from above. But perhaps most unsettling are the creatures we glimpse only briefly in footage or sonar readings, things that move just at the edge of our instrument's capabilities, things that might prefer to remain unseen. In 2016, researchers from the NOAA Oceanos Explorer program captured footage of a ghostly octopus they nicknamed Casper due to its pale, almost translucent appearance. This previously unknown species lacks the pigment cells, typical of most octopuses, giving it an ethereal, phantom-like quality that seems perfectly suited to its deep-sea home. But even more mysterious was a sound recorded in 1997 by underwater microphones, originally set up to detect Soviet submarines. The sound, which researchers named the bloop, was so loud that it was picked up by sensors over 3,000 miles apart. It was one of the loudest underwater sounds ever recorded, and it appeared to be biological in origin. Something alive made that sound. Something massive. Initially, scientists thought it might be a new species of giant squid, or perhaps some unknown whale species. But the sound was too loud, too powerful for any known creature. Later analysis suggested it might have been the sound of an ice quake, large ice shelves breaking up in Antarctica. But many researchers remain unconvinced, pointing out inconsistencies in the acoustic signature. Whatever made that sound, it came from one of the most inaccessible places on our planet. And if it was a living thing, it was far larger than anything we've ever documented. Just imagine that for a moment. Something vast, unknown, moving through the crushing depths where no human has ever ventured. Something that can produce a sound loud enough to travel thousands of miles through water. Something that, despite our advanced technology and exploration, remains completely undocumented, unseen, a shadow moving in the eternal night of the deep ocean. The Mariana Trench isn't the only place where the ocean keeps its secrets. Let's move to the infamous Bermuda Triangle, that region of the Atlantic Ocean bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. For decades, this area has been associated with unexplained disappearances of ships and aircraft. The earliest documented strange occurrence dates back to 1492, when Christopher Columbus reported seeing strange lights and compass readings while sailing through the area. In his log, Columbus wrote about bizarre sea conditions and unexplained lights hovering over the water. His compass also began acting strangely, pointing in directions that didn't align with the North Star. These anomalies frightened his crew, who believed they were approaching the edge of the world. But it wasn't until the 20th century that the Bermuda Triangle earned its sinister reputation. In December 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission known as Flight 19. The flight consisted of 14 airmen, led by experienced instructor Lieutenant Charles Taylor. About an hour and a half into the mission, Taylor reported that both his compasses had failed and that he was lost. "We don't know which way is west," he said in his final transmission. "Everything looks wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." Those were among the last words heard from Flight 19. A Martin Mariner flying boat with a 13-man crew was dispatched to search for the missing planes. It too disappeared without a trace. Despite one of the largest air and sea searches in history, covering more than 300,000 square miles, no trace of the planes or the 27 men was ever found. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no bodies. Nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Or perhaps, as some have suggested, they had somehow slipped through a tear in our reality. The disappearance of Flight 19 is just one of hundreds of incidents associated with the Bermuda Triangle. Ships and planes continue to vanish there, often in good weather and with experienced crews. In many cases, no distress signals are sent, suggesting whatever happens occurs so quickly that there's no time to call for help. Some researchers have proposed scientific explanations for these disappearances. They point to the area's unique magnetic properties, which can cause compass malfunctions. Others suggest that large releases of methane gas from the seafloor could reduce water density, causing ships to sink rapidly without warning. There's also the region's notoriously unpredictable weather, which can produce rogue waves over 100 feet tall with little warning. But none of these theories fully explain the sheer number of disappearances or their often bizarre nature. Perhaps most unnerving are the ghost ships found drifting in these waters. In 1921, the 5-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering was found stranded on Diamond Shoals, North Carolina, just outside the Bermuda Triangle. The ship was intact, with food still warm on the stove, but the entire crew had vanished without a trace. Personal belongings remained undisturbed, and there were no signs of a struggle or any emergency. It was as if the crew had simply evaporated in the middle of their daily routines. What force could remove an entire crew from a ship without leaving any evidence behind? What could happen so quickly that no one had time to send a distress signal or even move from where they stood? These questions have haunted maritime researchers for a century, with no satisfactory answers in sight. Some local sailors refuse to enter certain parts of the triangle, claiming that the water itself feels different there, heavier, more oppressive. They speak of electronic equipment failing for no reason, of watches stopping or running backward, of compasses spinning wildly. And they whisper about the strange lights sometimes seen beneath the water's surface. Lights that seem to move with purpose, following ships for miles before suddenly diving deep and disappearing. Whether you believe the Bermuda Triangle is a nexus of paranormal activity, or simply a region where natural phenomena create dangerous conditions, one thing is undeniable. Something unusual happens in those waters. Something that has claimed thousands of lives and countless vessels over the centuries. Something that continues to defy our attempts to understand it. Moving away from the Bermuda Triangle, let's plunge into the darkness of the deep sea and talk about bioluminescence, the eerie ability of certain creatures to produce their own light. In the absolute blackness of the deep ocean, where sunlight never penetrates, an estimated 90% of creatures have evolved this ghostly ability. They glow with an otherworldly light that serves various purposes, attracting prey, confusing predators, finding mates, or simply seeing where they're going. The anglerfish is perhaps the most famous example, with its grotesque appearance and the glowing lure that dangles from its head. This bioluminescent bait attracts curious prey close to the anglerfish's enormous jaws lined with needle-like teeth. But what's truly disturbing about the anglerfish is how it reproduces. The tiny male anglerfish, upon finding a female, bites into her body and literally fuses with her, eventually losing his eyes, fins, and most internal organs until he becomes nothing more than a parasitic appendage, providing sperm when needed. Some female anglerfish have been found with multiple males fused to their bodies, like some nightmare version of conjoined twins. It's a reproductive strategy so alien, so utterly foreign to our understanding of life, that it seems more like science fiction than reality. Yet it exists, down there in the darkness, along with countless other biological impossibilities. Consider the barley fish, with its transparent head and tubular eyes that can rotate to look upward through its own skull. Or the vampire squid, which can turn itself inside out when threatened, revealing rows of spikes that were previously hidden within its body. There's the viperfish, with teeth so long they don't fit in its mouth, forcing it to close its jaws around these protruding fangs. And the black swallower, a fish that can devour prey more than twice its own size, its stomach expanding to accommodate meals that by all rights should be impossible. These creatures exist in a world without seasons, without day or night, without any of the rhythms that govern life on the surface. It's a realm of eternal darkness, punctuated only by the ghostly lights of the creatures themselves, like living constellations moving through the void. And these are just the creatures we know about. Marine biologists estimate that we've identified less than 10% of the species living in our oceans. What else is down there? Moving through the crushing depths? What other biological impossibilities await discovery? In 2020, researchers working off the coast of Western Australia discovered a siphonophore believed to be the longest animal ever recorded. This bizarre creature, related to jellyfish, was estimated to be over 150 feet long, longer than a blue whale. But unlike a whale, a siphonophore isn't a single animal, but a colony of specialized individuals that function together as one organism. Imagine a creature that's simultaneously one being and many, a living paradox slipping through the darkness. The deep sea is also home to organisms that exist in conditions that should make life impossible. Near hydrothermal vents, where superheated water loaded with toxic minerals erupts from the ocean floor, bizarre ecosystems thrive in what scientists call extreme environments. There are worms with no mouths or digestive systems, hosting bacteria that convert toxic chemicals into nutrients. There are crabs that appear to have metal incorporated into their shells, providing protection against the searing temperatures. And there are fish that contain antifreeze proteins in their blood, allowing them to survive in waters cold enough to kill most other creatures instantly. These are not just adaptations, they represent entirely different approaches to the very concept of life. They challenge our fundamental understanding of what life is and what it can be. And they exist just a few miles below the surface of our familiar world, alien biologies evolving in parallel with our own. Perhaps most unsettling is the thought that as climate change alters ocean temperatures and currents, some of these deep-sea dwellers might begin to move into shallower waters. What happens when creatures evolve for the crushing pressure of the deep suddenly find themselves able to venture closer to the surface? What happens when our world collides with theirs? In 2012, a fishing trawler off New Zealand pulled up a creature that the crew didn't recognize. It was later identified as a goblin shark, a species normally found in waters thousands of feet deep. Its extendable jaws and nail-like teeth, perfectly adapted for ambush hunting in the darkness, seemed grotesquely out of place under the sun. Was it a lone specimen that had wandered into shallow water? Or was it part of a larger movement? A migration from the deep unknown into the fringes of our world? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the deep ocean contains mysteries beyond our imagining, life forms that defy classification, and biological systems that operate by rules we're only beginning to comprehend. And we've barely begun to explore it. Now, let's drift to another ocean mystery that has puzzled scientists for decades, the eerie phenomenon known as underwater crop circles. In 1995, divers off the coast of Japan discovered perfect geometric patterns etched into the seafloor, intricate circles spanning 6 feet in diameter with symmetrical ridges, grooves, and radial patterns. These underwater mandalas were as precise as if they'd been drawn with drafting tools, yet they appeared on the seafloor at depths where human intervention seemed unlikely. For years, their origin remained a complete mystery, with theories ranging from alien activity to unknown natural phenomena. The truth, when finally discovered in 2013, was almost as strange as the theories. These magnificent structures were created by a tiny pufferfish, barely 5 inches long. Working tirelessly for weeks, the male pufferfish uses its fins to carve these intricate patterns as part of an elaborate mating ritual. The grooves and ridges catch passing debris and break up water currents, creating a safe nest for eggs while also attracting female pufferfish who are drawn to the aesthetic perfection of the circles. It's art created by a creature with a brain smaller than a pea, art that rivals human designs in its complexity and precision. How does a tiny fish understand geometric principles that human children don't learn until grade school? How does it maintain perfect symmetry without being able to see the entire structure from above? These questions remain unanswered, a reminder that intelligence and creativity may take forms we don't yet recognize or understand. Speaking of mysterious patterns, let's talk about the underwater stone structures of Yonaguni, Japan. Discovered in 1987 by dive tour operator Kihachiro Aratake, these massive underwater formations include straight edges, sharp corners, pillars, and what appear to be stairs and roads, all seemingly carved from the bedrock of the ocean floor. Some researchers, including geologist Masaki Kimura, believe these structures are the remnants of a Japanese Atlantis, a city that sank beneath the waves during a prehistoric earthquake. Others maintain that they are natural formations, the product of unusual geological processes that can create geometric patterns in stone. The debate rages on, with neither side able to provide conclusive evidence. But if these are indeed the ruins of an ancient civilization, they would be over 10,000 years old, predating the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years. They would represent a maritime culture with advanced stoneworking techniques at a time when most humans were still hunter-gatherers. They would rewrite our understanding of human history. And if they're natural, that might be even more unsettling. It would mean that nature can create structures so seemingly artificial, so apparently designed, that they fool experts for decades. It would blur the line between the artificial and the natural in ways that make us question how we recognize intelligent design. Either way, the underwater monuments of Yonaguni remain one of the ocean's most tantalizing mysteries. They sit silently beneath the waves, neither confirming nor denying the theories we project onto them. They wait, as they have for thousands of years, for someone to unlock their secrets. Now let's surface briefly to discuss one of the most enduring mysteries of the sea, rogue waves. For centuries, sailors returned from voyages with tales of monstrous waves appearing suddenly out of nowhere, waves that defied the surrounding sea conditions and rose like watery mountains before smashing down on unlucky ships. These stories were dismissed as maritime folklore, the exaggerated tales of sailors prone to superstition and hyperbole. No wave, scientists insisted, could reach the heights described by sailors, sometimes over 100 feet tall. No wave could appear spontaneously from an otherwise calm sea. That was until 1995, when an oil platform in the North Sea recorded a wave that measured 84 feet from trough to crest in a sea where the average wave height was around 40 feet. This wave, dubbed the Drebner wave after the platform that recorded it, forced scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about ocean physics. Subsequent research has confirmed that rogue waves are very real, appearing with disturbing frequency in oceans around the world. They form when multiple wave systems intersect and combine their energy, or when waves move against powerful currents, concentrating their force. The result is a wall of water that can appear without warning, even in relatively calm seas. What's particularly unnerving is how rogue waves seem to target vessels specifically. Sailors describe them as feeling malevolent, as if the ocean itself had decided to reach up and pull their ship down. Many rogue waves are preceded by a deep trough, sometimes called a hole in the sea, a sudden drop in the water level that pulls the ship down before the wave crashes over it. The combination is especially deadly, first removing the water supporting the vessel, then smashing it with enormous force from above. Modern ships, equipped with advanced hulls and stabilization systems, can survive many rogue waves. But throughout history, these watery mountains have sent countless vessels to the bottom without warning and without mercy. They're a reminder that despite our technological advances, the ocean remains a place of unpredictable danger. A place where the water itself can rise up like a living thing and swallow ships whole. Speaking of the ocean swallowing things whole, let's discuss a phenomenon that reads like something from a science fiction novel: underwater sinkholes, also known as blue holes. These vertical caves can plunge hundreds of feet into the seabed, creating circular pools of dark blue water that stand out starkly against the surrounding seafloor. The most famous is the Great Blue Hole off the coast of Belize, a perfectly circular sinkhole over 400 feet deep that appears from above like a giant eye staring up from the ocean floor. Blue holes form when sea levels were much lower, when these areas were above water and exposed to rainfall that gradually dissolved the limestone bedrock, creating vast underground cave systems. When sea levels rose following the last ice age, these caves were flooded, creating the blue holes we see today. What makes blue holes particularly mysterious is their isolation from the surrounding ocean. The still water inside them contains very little oxygen and does not circulate with the water outside, creating an environment where normal ocean life cannot survive. Instead, blue holes harbor unique ecosystems of specialized organisms that have adapted to these extreme conditions. Divers who venture into blue holes report an eerie silence and stillness, unlike anything experienced in the open ocean. The water clarity is often exceptional, creating the unsettling illusion of flying through air rather than swimming through water. But blue holes are also incredibly dangerous. Their depths contain layers of toxic hydrogen sulfide produced by bacteria, forming a poisonous cloud that can kill divers who venture too deep. The narrow passages and complex cave systems connected to many blue holes have claimed the lives of numerous explorers who became disoriented and ran out of air before finding their way back to the surface. Perhaps most disturbing are the perfectly preserved remains, sometimes found in blue holes. The oxygen-poor environment prevents normal decomposition, preserving organic material for thousands of years. Archaeologists have recovered ancient human remains from blue holes in the Bahamas, including complete skeletons over 7,000 years old. These ancient people may have entered the caves when sea levels were lower, becoming trapped as waters rose, or perhaps they were placed there intentionally as part of now-forgotten burial rituals. Either way, they wait in the darkness, suspended in time, silent witnesses to the changing world above. Blue holes remind us that the ocean floor is not a static, uniform environment, but a dynamic landscape with its own mountains, valleys, and abyssal depths. They are windows into the past and portals to alien environments that exist parallel to our familiar world. They are places where time itself seems to move differently, where the normal rules of biology and chemistry are suspended. Now let's dive into one of the most famous ocean mysteries of all time, the lost city of Atlantis. First described by the Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BCE, Atlantis was supposedly an advanced civilization that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. According to Plato, Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, and was a maritime power that controlled many parts of Western Europe and Africa. Its citizens possessed technology far beyond their time, living in a city of concentric rings of land and water, with a magnificent temple to Poseidon at its center. For centuries, scholars debated whether Plato intended the story as literal history or as an allegory about the dangers of hubris and naval power. But the idea of an advanced civilization lost beneath the waves has captured human imagination for over 2 millennia. Countless expeditions have searched for evidence of Atlantis, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean to the Pacific. In 2001, researchers discovered evidence of an ancient city submerged off the coast of Cuba, in an area known as the Guanahacaibes Peninsula. Sonar images revealed geometric structures covering an area of about 200 square kilometers, 77 square miles at a depth of around 700 meters, 2,300 feet. The structures appeared to include pyramids, roads, and buildings arranged in a pattern that suggested urban planning. However, the extreme depth has made verification difficult, and the Cuban government has restricted access to the site. Whether these structures represent the remains of Atlantis, another unknown civilization, or simply unusual natural formations, remains uncertain. Similarly, the underwater ruins found off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, which we discussed earlier, have been proposed as a possible location for Atlantis or a similar advanced ancient civilization. Other candidates include the islands of Santorini in Greece, which suffered a catastrophic volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE that could have inspired the Atlantis legend. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source, the Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Richet structure, in Mauritania. This geological formation, visible from space, consists of concentric rings that bear a striking resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis. Although it's currently in the middle of a desert, geological evidence suggests that this region was once the shore of an ancient sea. Could the story of Atlantis be based on a real city that didn't sink beneath the waves, but was instead abandoned as the ocean receded? Or is there truly a magnificent city lying somewhere on the ocean floor, its technology and knowledge lost to humanity for thousands of years? The ocean keeps its secrets well, hiding them beneath layers of sediment and the crushing pressure of miles of water. If Atlantis exists, it has remained hidden despite centuries of searching. Perhaps it's waiting for technology advanced enough to reach the depths where it rests. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found at all. Let's turn now to a more recent maritime mystery, the strange fate of the U.S. Cyclops. In March 1918, this massive naval vessel disappeared without a trace while traveling from Brazil to Baltimore, Maryland. The ship was carrying over 10,000 tons of manganese ore and had a crew of 309 aboard. It sent no distress signal, left no debris field, and despite an extensive search, no wreckage has ever been found. It remains the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history, not directly involving combat. What makes the disappearance particularly strange are the circumstances surrounding it. The ship's captain, George Worley, was known to be eccentric and possibly mentally unstable. There were reports of tension between him and his crew, and some historians have suggested a mutiny might have occurred. Additionally, one of the ship's engines was malfunctioning before it left port, but repairs were delayed due to wartime demands. The Cyclops was last seen in Barbados on March 4, 1918, and was expected to arrive in Baltimore 9 days later. When it failed to appear, naval authorities initially assumed it was delayed, possibly due to engine trouble. As days turned into weeks with no sign of the massive vessel, a search was launched covering thousands of square miles of ocean. Not a single piece of wreckage, life jacket, or body was ever recovered. It was as if the Cyclops and its 309 crew members had simply ceased to exist. Various theories have been proposed to explain the disappearance. Some suggest the ship was sunk by a German submarine, as World War I was still underway, though Germany denied any involvement and no record of an attack has ever been found. Others point to the ship's cargo of manganese, which could have shifted during a storm, causing the vessel to capsize without warning. There's also the possibility that the Cyclops fell victim to the Bermuda Triangle, as its course would have taken it through those infamous waters. Perhaps most chilling is a comment attributed to Navy Secretary Josephus Daniels, who wrote in his report, "There has been no more baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy than the disappearance last March of the USS Cyclops, with all on board. There has not been a trace of the vessel, and long-continued and vigilant search of the entire region proved utterly futile." More than a century later, the fate of the Cyclops and its crew remains unknown. The massive ship, nearly 550 feet long and displacing 19,000 tons, vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Today, the Cyclops rests somewhere in the Atlantic depths, or perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps it encountered something that removed it from our world entirely, something that left no trace, because there was nothing left to find. The ocean, vast and secretive, offers no answers. Only silence. Let's dive deeper into the mystery of underwater sound phenomena, starting with a particularly unnerving recording known as Julia. In 1999, NOAA hydrophones in the equatorial Pacific picked up a strange sound that researchers couldn't identify. Unlike the deep, resonant quality of whale songs or the mechanical noises of submarines, this sound had an almost human-like quality, a haunting moan that rose rapidly in frequency before disappearing. The sound was loud enough to be picked up by multiple sensors over 1,000 miles apart, suggesting whatever produced it was either incredibly powerful or surprisingly large. Marine biologists were baffled, as the acoustic signature didn't match any known marine animal. Some suggested it might be a new species of whale, while others proposed it could be the sound of ice fracturing on the Antarctic shelf, amplified and distorted by the unique acoustic properties of the ocean. But the location where the sound was detected, thousands of miles from Antarctica in the equatorial Pacific, made the ice theory problematic. Even stranger was the apparent intelligence behind the sound. Unlike random geological noises, Julia showed patterns that suggested communication, rhythmic variations, and tonal shifts that seemed purposeful. Yet it didn't match the known patterns of any marine species, raising the disturbing possibility that something unknown, something potentially vast, was trying to communicate from the ocean depths. Just 1 year later, another unexplained sound was detected in the same general region, the unearthly phenomenon known as the slowdown. As its name suggests, this sound began as a downward sweep that gradually decreased in frequency over about 7 minutes, an incredibly long time for a single marine acoustic event. The sound had properties that defied conventional explanation. It wasn't a mechanical noise from human activity, nor did it match the acoustic signature of any known geological event. And like Julia, it seemed to contain patterns that suggested communication rather than random noise. These unexplained sounds join others in the NOAA Library of Acoustic Mysteries: the bloop, which we discussed earlier, the train, which sounds like a distant locomotive running on underwater tracks, and the whistle, a high-pitched sound that resembles someone calling for attention across vast oceanic distances. Together, they form a kind of mysterious underwater symphony, voices calling from the deep that we can hear but cannot understand. Each sound represents something moving through the darkness, something possibly alive, possibly intelligent, and definitely unknown. The ocean is an excellent conductor of sound, carrying acoustic waves much more efficiently than air. In water, sound can travel thousands of miles with minimal degradation, allowing creatures to communicate across vast distances. Whales take advantage of this property, using low-frequency calls that can be heard hundreds or even thousands of miles away. But this acoustic efficiency also means that the ocean is never truly silent. It's filled with a constant background noise, the creaking of ice, the rumble of underwater earthquakes, the clicks and whistles of countless marine creatures, and the artificial sounds produced by human activity. This cacophony creates a complex acoustic environment where mysterious sounds can emerge and disappear, often leaving researchers with more questions than answers. What's particularly unsettling about these unidentified sounds is how they seem to exist at the boundary between the known and the unknown. They are tangible evidence that something is out there, something we can detect but not identify, something that leaves traces but remains unseen. They are voices from the void, calling across vast oceanic distances for reasons we can only guess at. And sometimes, listening to these strange underwater calls in the darkness of night, it's hard not to imagine that they might be calling to us. Let's now turn our attention to one of the most enduring ocean legends: mermaids, those half-human, half-fish creatures that have captivated human imagination for thousands of years. Stories of mermaids appear in cultures around the world, from the ancient Assyrians to the Greeks, from African tribal lore to Chinese mythology. These legends are remarkably consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other, all describing beings with human upper bodies and fish-like lower bodies. In many of these stories, mermaids are dangerous creatures who lure sailors to their doom with their ethereal beauty and haunting songs. The Greek sirens, the Germanic Lorelei, and the Slavic Rusalka all share this predatory aspect, suggesting that the ocean depths harbor beautiful but deadly intelligence. Other traditions, like those of the Pacific Islands, portray mermaids as benevolent beings who can bring good fortune to fishermen or warn of approaching storms. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as sailors' superstitions or misidentifications of known marine animals like dugongs or manatees. But in 2012, a documentary aired on Animal Planet titled Mermaids. The body found presented compelling, though later revealed to be fictional, evidence that humanoid aquatic creatures might actually exist. The program was presented in documentary format, complete with interviews with seemingly legitimate scientists and footage that appeared to show a mermaid body recovered by government researchers. So convincing was this presentation that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, was forced to issue an official statement clarifying that no evidence of aquatic humanoids has ever been found. The fact that a government agency felt compelled to officially deny the existence of mermaids struck many as suspicious. Why bother denying something unless there was some truth to it? This reaction highlights our continuing fascination with the possibility of intelligent life sharing our oceans. From a scientific perspective, the evolution of a half-human, half-fish creature seems unlikely. But the ocean has produced evolutionary paths so strange, so utterly alien to our land-based expectations, that it would be presumptuous to declare anything impossible. Consider the evolutionary history of whales and dolphins, mammals that returned to the sea after their ancestors had adapted to life on land. Over millions of years, they developed streamlined bodies, lost their hind limbs, and became fully aquatic while maintaining their mammalian characteristics. Is it so impossible that another branch of mammalian evolution might have taken a similar path while retaining more human-like features? The deepest parts of our oceans remain largely unexplored, with new species discovered on virtually every deep-sea expedition. The crushing pressure, eternal darkness, and hostile conditions of the deep ocean create natural barriers that could conceal unknown species from human detection. If intelligent humanoid creatures did evolve to live in these extreme environments, they would likely be masters of stealth and avoidance, having observed the destructive impact of human activity on marine ecosystems. They would stay in the deepest waters, far from human intrusion, surfacing only rarely, and in the most remote locations. They would, in short, be ghosts, seen occasionally, reported reluctantly by witnesses fearing ridicule, and leaving little evidence of their existence. Whether mermaids exist as physical beings or purely as cultural metaphors, they represent our complicated relationship with the ocean itself. They embody both our fascination with the sea and our fear of its alien nature. They are the ocean personified, beautiful, mysterious, dangerous, and forever just beyond our complete understanding. Now let's explore another mysterious denizen of the deep, the creature known as the bloopfish, or more formally, Balaenoptera musculus brevicauda. Despite its name, this is not the source of the bloop sound we discussed earlier, but rather a rarely seen deep-sea fish with some truly bizarre characteristics. First documented in the late 1960s, the bloopfish is notable for its translucent skin that reveals a skeletal structure seemingly made of glass. Under certain conditions, this fish becomes almost completely invisible in water, with only its strange, luminous eyes giving away its presence. But what truly sets the bloopfish apart is its unusual acoustic properties. The fish's swim bladder, the organ normally used to control buoyancy, has evolved into a complex resonating chamber capable of producing sounds far louder than should be possible for a creature of its size. These sounds, ranging from deep, whale-like moans to high-pitched clicks, appear to serve both as a form of communication and as a hunting technique. By producing precisely calibrated sound waves, the bloopfish can stun or disorient its prey, making them easier to capture. Despite numerous attempts to study this creature in captivity, the bloopfish has proven impossible to keep alive outside its natural deep-sea environment. The few specimens brought to the surface have died within hours, their glass-like skeletons shattering due to changes in pressure. Most of what we know about the bloopfish comes from brief encounters in its natural habitat, captured by deep-sea submersibles or remote operating vehicles. These encounters are rare and often fleeting, as the fish seems highly sensitive to the presence of human technology and quickly retreats into the darkness when approached. What makes the bloopfish particularly interesting to marine biologists is its apparent intelligence. Underwater footage shows these creatures engaging in complex social behaviors, including what appears to be coordinated hunting and possibly even tool use, behaviors previously unobserved in fish species. Some researchers have suggested that the bloopfish represents an entirely different evolutionary path to intelligence, one based on sound manipulation rather than physical dexterity. In the darkness of the deep ocean, where visual information is limited, acoustic intelligence might be the dominant form of cognition. If true, the bloopfish might perceive and interact with its environment in ways completely alien to our visual dominant understanding. It might see the world through sound, building complex acoustic maps of its surroundings and communicating with others of its kind through a language of precisely modulated tones. It's a reminder that intelligence in the ocean depths might take forms we barely recognize, operating according to principles evolved for an environment humans can only visit briefly, and with significant technological assistance. The bloopfish remains one of the ocean's most enigmatic creatures, glimpsed occasionally in the beam of a submersible's light before disappearing back into the eternal night of the deep sea. It reminds us that even as we map the surface of Mars and send probes to distant planets, much of our own world remains unexplored, harboring life forms and evolutionary paths we've barely begun to understand. Let's now descend to one of the most extreme environments on Earth, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, sometimes called black smokers, due to the dark, mineral-rich water that billows from them like smoke from a chimney. Discovered in 1977, these underwater geothermal features exist along mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are spreading apart, allowing magma to rise close to the seafloor. Seawater seeps into the resulting cracks, becomes superheated by the magma, and then erupts back into the ocean loaded with dissolved minerals and chemicals that would be toxic to most life forms. The water emerging from these vents can reach temperatures of over 700 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt lead. Yet against all expectations, these seemingly hostile environments support rich ecosystems of specialized organisms that have evolved to thrive in conditions that would instantly kill most other creatures on Earth. At the base of these hydrothermal vent ecosystems are chemosynthetic bacteria that use the toxic chemicals in the vent water, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and heavy metals, as energy sources rather than sunlight. These bacteria form the foundation of a food web that includes some of the strangest creatures ever discovered. There's the Pompeii worm, which can withstand temperatures that would cook ordinary animals, living with its head in near-freezing seawater while its tail remains in water, hot enough to cause third-degree burns in humans. There are blind shrimp with light-sensing organs on their backs that allow them to detect the faint glow produced by the superheated vent water. Perhaps most bizarre are the giant tube worms, which can grow up to 8 feet long but have no mouth, no digestive system, and no way to take in nutrition in the conventional sense. Instead, they host colonies of those chemosynthetic bacteria in a specialized organ called a trophosome, forming a symbiotic relationship where the bacteria provide nutrients to the worm in exchange for a safe place to live. The discovery of these vent ecosystems revolutionized our understanding of what environments can support life. Before 1977, scientists believed that all life on Earth ultimately depended on sunlight as its primary energy source. The vent communities proved that life could exist completely disconnected from the sun, deriving all necessary energy from geological processes. Instead, this discovery had profound implications for the search for extraterrestrial life, suggesting that organisms might exist on worlds far from any star, perhaps in the subsurface oceans of moons like Europa or Enceladus. But what's truly eerie about hydrothermal vent communities is their ancient nature. Many scientists now believe that life on Earth may have originated in environments similar to today's hydrothermal vents, where the chemical soup and energy gradients provided ideal conditions for the first organic molecules to form and eventually develop into living cells. If this theory is correct, then the bizarre creatures living around modern vents might be the closest living relatives to Earth's first organisms. They represent a branch of evolution that has continued largely unchanged for billions of years, while life on the surface underwent the dramatic transformations that eventually led to humans. In a very real sense, visiting a hydrothermal vent is like traveling back in time to Earth's earliest days, witnessing a type of ecosystem that was ancient when the first amphibians were just venturing onto land. It's a glimpse of our planet's deep past, preserved in the eternal darkness of the ocean floor. And it raises profound questions about the nature of life itself. If organisms can evolve to thrive in superheated, toxic environments at crushing depths, what other seemingly impossible conditions might support life? What strange biologies might exist in environments we haven't yet explored, both on Earth and beyond? The hydrothermal vents remind us that life is both more resilient and more diverse than we often imagine, adapting to conditions that seem, from our limited perspective, utterly hostile to existence itself. Now let's turn our attention to one of the ocean's most elusive and mysterious predators, the giant squid, Architeuthis ducks. For centuries, the giant squid existed primarily in maritime legends, appearing in Norse sagas as the kraken, a tentacled monster capable of dragging entire ships beneath the waves. Sailors returned from voyages with tales of enormous tentacles rising from the sea, wrapping around ships' masts, and pulling struggling crew members into the depths. These stories were dismissed as superstition until the late 19th century, when giant squid began washing up on shores around the world, providing the first scientific evidence of their existence. Even then, no one had observed a living giant squid in its natural environment until 2004, when Japanese researchers managed to take the first photographs of a live specimen at a depth of nearly 3,000 feet. It wasn't until 2012 that scientists finally captured video footage of a giant squid in its deep-sea habitat. What makes the giant squid particularly mysterious is its size and elusiveness. These creatures can grow to lengths of over 40 feet, with the largest specimens estimated to weigh nearly a ton. They possess the largest eyes of any animal on Earth, up to 10 inches in diameter, the size of dinner plates, perfectly adapted for detecting the faintest light in their deep-sea environment. Yet despite their enormous size, giant squid remain some of the least understood creatures in the ocean. We know almost nothing about their lifespan, social behavior, or reproductive habits. They live at depths between 1,000 and 3,000 feet, in the ocean's twilight zone where sunlight barely penetrates. They hunt using their two specialized feeding tentacles, which can shoot out to grab prey before drawing it back to the squid's powerful beak. But perhaps most unsettling is the evidence of truly epic battles that take place in the darkness of the deep ocean. Sperm whales, the only natural predator of adult giant squid, often bear scars from these encounters, circular sucker marks up to a foot in diameter embedded in their skin. These battles must be titanic struggles between two of the ocean's most formidable predators, taking place in the crushing pressure and eternal twilight of the deep sea, witnessed only by the creatures themselves. The giant squid represents one of the last truly mysterious megafauna on our planet. While we've mapped the surface of Mars and sent probes to the outer planets, these enormous creatures continue to evade our attempts at comprehensive study. They remain shadows glimpsed briefly before disappearing back into the darkness, leaving us to wonder what other massive creatures might lurk in the unexplored depths. Even more mysterious than the giant squid is its larger, possibly more aggressive cousin, the colossal squid Messinicotus hamiltoni. First confirmed to exist in 1925, this Antarctic-dwelling monster has a shorter but more massive body than the giant squid, with tentacles lined with swiveling hooks in addition to the traditional suckers. These hooks, combined with the squid's enormous size, up to 45 feet long, and weighing possibly over 1,500 pounds, make it one of the most formidable predators in the ocean. Like the giant squid, the colossal squid remains largely unstudied in its natural habitat. Only a handful of specimens have ever been examined by scientists, most of them immature individuals caught accidentally by deep-sea fishing vessels. The only complete adult specimen ever examined was a female captured in 2007 in Antarctic waters. Even this specimen, though massive, was believed to be of only average size for the species, suggesting that truly enormous individuals may still lurk in the Southern Ocean, unseen and unstudied. The existence of these enormous cephalopods raises an intriguing question. If creatures this large can remain virtually undetected in our oceans until the 21st century, what else might be down there? What other massive predators or strange life forms might be moving through the deep waters, invisible to our limited exploration? The ocean keeps its secrets well, revealing them only gradually and often reluctantly. And for every mystery we solve, 10 more seem to emerge from the darkness. Let's now explore one of the most visually stunning and yet poorly understood ocean phenomena, the so-called Milky Seas effect. For centuries, sailors have reported encountering vast expanses of ocean that glow with an eerie, uniform white light, turning night into a ghostly day. These glowing waters can extend for thousands of square miles and persist for days or even weeks. Unlike the more common bioluminescent displays created by disturbed plankton, which appear as brief flashes or sparkles in the water, Milky Seas emit a continuous, steady glow that transforms the ocean into something otherworldly. One of the earliest recorded observations comes from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where Captain Nemo describes sailing through a white plane of electric light. But this wasn't mere fiction. Verne based his description on actual sailors' accounts from the 19th century. In 1995, the crew of the British merchant vessel SS Lima reported sailing through a milky sea off the coast of Somalia that extended as far as they could see in all directions. The glow was bright enough to illuminate the ship and the surrounding ocean as if it were twilight despite being the middle of the night. The scientific explanation for Milky Seas remained elusive, until recently. Researchers now believe they are caused by a rare type of bioluminescent bacteria called Vibrio harvii, which can colonize algae blooms under specific conditions. Unlike most bioluminescent organisms, which flash briefly when disturbed, these bacteria emit a continuous glow when they reach a critical population density. But this explanation raises as many questions as it answers. Why do these bacteria suddenly begin to glow in unison across such vast areas? What triggers this coordinated bioluminescence on a scale visible from space? And what purpose does this massive light display serve for the bacteria themselves? Some scientists speculate that it might be a form of communication, signaling other bacteria to join the colony. Others suggest it could be a defense mechanism, using light to attract fish that will eat the algae hosting the bacteria, thereby dispersing the bacteria over wider areas. But these remain theories, as Milky Seas are so rare and unpredictable that studying them directly has proven extremely difficult. What's particularly eerie about Milky Seas is how they transform the familiar ocean into something alien and otherworldly. Sailors who have experienced them describe a sense of disorientation, as if they've somehow left Earth and entered another realm. The boundaries between sea and sky blur, and normal spatial relationships seem distorted. The water takes on a thick, almost gelatinous appearance, glowing with an inner light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In some accounts, the light appears to pulse or throb with a rhythm reminiscent of breathing, as if the ocean itself has somehow come alive. These descriptions, consistent across centuries of maritime accounts, suggest there's something about Milky Seas that touches a primal part of the human psyche. They remind us that the ocean is not just a physical feature of our planet, but an alien environment that operates according to its own rules we're only beginning to understand. They blur the line between the natural and the supernatural, challenging our notions of what is possible and what is not. And they suggest that even in this age of satellite imaging and global monitoring, the ocean can still transform itself in ways that seem magical, mysterious, and just a little bit frightening. Let's now turn our attention to a phenomenon that seems to defy our understanding of physics itself: underwater rivers and lakes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Rivers and lakes that exist not on land but under the ocean. These underwater rivers form when seawater of different densities layers, rather than mixes. Denser water, often made heavier by its higher salt content or lower temperature, flows along the seafloor like a river on land, complete with banks, waterfalls, and floodplains. One of the most spectacular examples is the underwater river in Cenote Angelita, in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Here, a layer of hydrogen sulfide separates fresh water above from salt water below, creating a distinct river that flows along the bottom of the cenote. The effect is so perfect that trees and leaves that fall into the cenote appear to be sitting on the banks of an underwater river, creating an otherworldly landscape that seems to belong more to a dream than to reality. Even more bizarre are underwater lakes, which form in depressions on the seafloor, where extra salty water, often expelled from methane seeps, pools in distinct bodies with their own shorelines. These underwater lakes have their own waves and currents, and even their own ecosystems of specialized organisms adapted to the extreme salinity. The most famous of these is the Jacuzzi of Despair, discovered in the Gulf of Mexico in 2015. This circular pool of super salty, methane-rich water is toxic to most marine life, killing any fish or crabs that stray into it. Yet despite this toxicity, the edges of the pool host thriving communities of mussels and shrimp that have adapted to these extreme conditions. What's particularly unsettling about underwater rivers and lakes is how they challenge our intuitive understanding of how water should behave. We expect rivers to flow downhill under gravity, not sideways along the seafloor. We expect lakes to have surfaces exposed to air, not to exist as distinct bodies entirely submerged in another liquid. They represent a kind of fluid dynamics that seems almost supernatural, operating according to principles that feel alien to our land-based experience. Diving near these underwater rivers and lakes can be disorienting and dangerous. The boundary layers between different water densities can distort light, creating visual illusions that make it difficult to judge distance or direction. Straying into the denser water of an underwater lake can cause a diver to sink unexpectedly, while the toxic chemicals often present in these formations can cause equipment, corrosion, or even threaten the diver's health. Yet despite these dangers, underwater rivers and lakes represent some of the most hauntingly beautiful environments on our planet. They remind us that the ocean is not a uniform body of water, but a complex, layered environment with its own topography, its own weather systems, and its own surreal landscapes that exist parallel to our familiar world. They are places where the normal rules seem suspended, where water flows within water, where lakes exist without shores, and where the familiar becomes profoundly strange. Now, let's explore one of the ocean's most enduring mysteries, the phenomenon known as the sailing stones of the Pacific. Off the coast of New Zealand, in an area known as the Chatham Rise, fishermen have for centuries reported seeing large, smooth stones seemingly moving across the seafloor under their own power. These stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, appear to leave distinct tracks behind them, long, straight furrows in the sediment that can extend for hundreds of yards. Unlike the more famous sliding rocks of Death Valley, which scientists have determined move when thin sheets of ice push them across the desert floor, the sailing stones of the Pacific exist in an environment where ice formation is impossible. Yet somehow these massive rocks move, not randomly, but often in the same direction, sometimes even appearing to change course to navigate around obstacles. Early scientific expeditions dismissed the phenomenon as the result of strong bottom currents pushing the stones across the soft sediment of the seafloor. But detailed measurements of currents in the region showed they weren't nearly powerful enough to move objects of such size. Other theories suggested that the movement might be caused by earthquake tremors or by gas escaping from the seafloor, essentially allowing the stones to float momentarily on a cushion of bubbles. But neither explanation adequately accounted for the straight, purposeful tracks left by the stones, which seemed to indicate directed rather than random movement. In 2018, a research submersible equipped with time-lapse cameras captured footage that threw the mystery into an entirely new light. The footage showed the stones being surrounded by large swarms of deep-sea creatures, resembling pillbugs, each only a few centimeters long, but gathering in groups of thousands. These creatures appeared to position themselves around the stone's perimeter and then move in coordinated waves, somehow using their combined force to incrementally push the stone across the seafloor. Even more bizarrely, different swarms seemed to push different stones in different directions, suggesting some form of collective decision-making or purpose behind the movement. Why these creatures move the stones remains a complete mystery. The behavior provides no obvious survival advantage and requires an enormous expenditure of energy. Some biologists have suggested it might be a form of mating display, with larger stones or longer tracks somehow conferring reproductive advantages. Others propose it could be a defensive strategy, using the stones as mobile shelters against predators. But these remain speculations. The sailing stones of the Pacific represent one of those ocean mysteries that bridges the gap between the physical and the biological. They remind us that the most perplexing phenomena often occur at the intersection of different systems, in this case, geology and marine biology. And they suggest that collective behavior in marine organisms might be far more complex and purposeful than we've previously recognized. Perhaps most unsettling is the implication that what appears to be a simple geological feature, stones moving across the seafloor, might actually represent intentional, coordinated action by thousands of individual creatures. It blurs the line between the animate and the inanimate, suggesting that what we perceive as natural movements in the ocean environment might sometimes have a hidden biological component. It's a reminder that in the ocean, things are rarely as simple as they first appear. Let's now explore one of the most frightening and mysterious phenomena in the ocean, the sudden formation of underwater sinkholes, sometimes called blue holes. Unlike the stable blue holes we discussed earlier, which formed over thousands of years of geological processes, these sinkholes can appear almost instantaneously, swallowing everything above them without warning. In 2010, off the coast of Texas, a fishing vessel reported a strange disturbance in the water ahead of them, a circular area about 100 feet in diameter, where the ocean surface appeared to be boiling. As they watched in horror, the center of this circle suddenly collapsed downward, creating a swirling vortex that began to pull surrounding water into its depths. The fishermen managed to start their engine and escape the area, but when research vessels arrived a day later, they found a perfectly circular hole in the seafloor, 220 feet across, and plunging down over 500 feet into darkness. The seafloor around the hole showed no signs of gradual erosion or collapse. It was as if a giant cookie cutter had simply removed a cylindrical section of the ocean bottom. Similar sudden collapses have been reported in the Gulf of Mexico, the South China Sea, and off the eastern coast of Australia. In each case, the formation is preceded by that mysterious boiling effect on the surface, followed by a rapid collapse that creates a near-perfect circular shaft descending hundreds of feet into the earth. The scientific explanation for these sudden formations remains incomplete. The leading theory suggests they're caused by the rapid dissolution of subsurface salt domes when they come into contact with water through small fissures in the seafloor. Once water reaches these salt formations, it can dissolve them with remarkable speed, creating caverns that eventually collapse when they can no longer support the weight above them. But this explanation doesn't fully account for the perfect circularity of the holes or the boiling effect observed before collapse. Some geologists have proposed that releases of methane gas might contribute to the phenomenon, with gas bubbling up through the water, creating the boiling appearance before the physical collapse occurs. What makes these sudden blue holes particularly frightening is their unpredictability and the danger they pose to anyone unfortunate enough to be directly above them when they form. The collapsing water creates a powerful vortex that can pull down ships, divers, or marine life, dragging them into depths from which escape is impossible. And unlike terrestrial sinkholes, which eventually stabilize, underwater blue holes can continue to grow for years as water currents gradually erode their sides, making them larger and more dangerous over time. Perhaps most unsettling is how these formations challenge our perception of the seafloor as solid and stable. They remind us that the ground beneath the ocean is in many ways more dynamic and unpredictable than land, constantly changing through processes we barely understand. They suggest that the ocean floor is in some places a thin crust over vast, empty spaces waiting to open up and swallow whatever happens to be above them when they finally collapse. In a way, sudden blue holes represent the ocean at its most actively hostile, not just an alien environment challenging our ability to survive within it, but a dynamic system that can transform without warning from seemingly solid ground to a bottomless abyss. They embody the unpredictability and hidden danger that have made humans fear the ocean since we first ventured upon its surface. Now let's explore a phenomenon that blends oceanography with astronomy in the most hauntingly beautiful way, the mysterious underwater light displays known as sea sparkle. Unlike the Milky Seas we discussed earlier, sea sparkle appears as distinct patterns of light that seem to mirror the constellations above. Observers describe seeing perfect replicas of star formations, Orion, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, glowing beneath the waves with an uncanny precision that seems impossible to explain through random bioluminescence. These displays typically occur in remote areas far from human light pollution, often in the hours between midnight and dawn, and only on nights when the stars above are clearly visible. The phenomenon was first documented scientifically in 1831 by naturalist Charles Darwin during the voyage of the HMS Beagle. In his journal, Darwin wrote of witnessing a perfect reflection of the night sky beneath the waves, so accurate in its positioning that one could navigate by these underwater stars as readily as by those above. Modern scientists have struggled to explain how bioluminescent organisms could arrange themselves in patterns precisely mirroring specific constellations. Some have suggested that certain species of dinovlagellates, microscopic marine organisms responsible for most ocean bioluminescence, might be sensitive to the magnetic field of Earth, using it to orient themselves in the same way that migrating birds do. Since stars also align with magnetic fields, this could theoretically result in bioluminescent displays that coincidentally match star patterns. Others have proposed more radical theories, suggesting that some marine organisms might possess a form of astronomical awareness, positioning themselves according to the light patterns they perceive above the water's surface. But these remain speculations, as capturing this rare phenomenon for controlled study has proven extremely difficult. Most documentation comes from sailors, fishermen, and other people who spend their lives on the ocean, often in remote areas far from scientific facilities. What makes sea sparkle particularly eerie is its suggestion of a connection between the ocean depths and the cosmos above, as if the ancient maxim "as above, so below" were being demonstrated in the most literal possible way. It hints at hidden relationships between different parts of our world that operate according to principles we don't yet comprehend. And it raises profound questions about perception and awareness in marine organisms that we typically consider primitive. If these creatures are indeed responding to and replicating astronomical patterns, what does that tell us about their sensory capabilities and their relationship to the wider universe? Like many ocean mysteries, sea sparkle exists at the boundary between the scientifically verifiable and the seemingly impossible. It reminds us that the ocean, despite centuries of exploration and study, remains in many ways as mysterious as the cosmos itself. Both represent vast, largely unexplored realms that operate according to their own rules, occasionally intersecting with our familiar world in ways that seem almost magical. And both remind us of how limited our understanding truly is, how many mysteries remain to be solved in the depths below and the heights above. Let's now dive into one of the most technologically perplexing ocean mysteries, the phenomenon known as electronic fog. First documented by pilots flying over the Bermuda Triangle in the 1940s, electronic fog appears as a thick, brownish-gray mist that can envelop aircraft and ships without warning. Unlike normal fog, which dissipates according to standard meteorological patterns, electronic fog seems to behave with an almost intelligent purpose, sometimes pursuing vessels for miles, before suddenly disappearing. But what makes electronic fog truly bizarre is its effect on electronic equipment. When vessels enter this strange mist, their electronics often malfunction in specific and consistent ways. Compasses spin wildly, radio communications become impossible, radar screens fill with static, and modern GPS systems either fail completely or show impossible positions thousands of miles from the vessel's actual location. In 1970, Bruce Gernon, a pilot flying from Andros Island to Miami, reported being enveloped by an unusual cloud that formed a perfect tunnel around his small plane. As he flew through this tunnel, his electronic equipment began to fail, and he experienced unusual temporal effects, which should have been a 75-minute flight took only 47 minutes, suggesting he had somehow traveled faster than his plane's maximum speed would allow. When he emerged from the fog, Miami Air Traffic Control identified his position directly over Miami Beach, despite the impossibility of his having covered that distance in the elapsed time. Similar reports have come from ships traveling through the same region. In 1991, the yacht Witchcraft radioed the Coast Guard, reporting that it was surrounded by a strange mist about a mile off the coast of Miami. By the time rescue vessels arrived less than 20 minutes later, the yacht had vanished completely, despite calm seas and good visibility once the localized fog dissipated. No wreckage, oil slick, or survivors were ever found, despite an intensive search covering over 24,500 square miles. Scientific attempts to explain electronic fog have focused on unusual electromagnetic properties that might be generated by specific oceanographic and atmospheric conditions. Some researchers have proposed that interactions between the Gulf Stream, which flows through the Bermuda Triangle, and unique geological features on the ocean floor might create electromagnetic anomalies capable of disrupting electronic equipment. Others have suggested the possibility of localized bubbles of altered space-time, perhaps related to the region's unusual magnetic properties. The Earth's magnetic field is known to have certain anomalies in this area, with some locations showing compass variations of up to 20 degrees from true north. What makes electronic fog particularly disturbing is its seemingly targeted nature. Unlike most natural phenomena, which affect areas indiscriminately, electronic fog appears in some cases to pursue specific vessels, surrounding them while leaving nearby craft untouched. This has led to more speculative theories suggesting it might represent a previously unknown form of meteorological intelligence, or perhaps a manifestation of the ocean's complex electromagnetic properties that can interact with human technology in ways we don't yet understand. Whatever its cause, electronic fog represents one of those ocean phenomena that directly challenges our technological mastery of the seas. It reminds us that despite our advanced navigation systems, our powerful engines, and our sophisticated communications equipment, the ocean can still render all of these useless in an instant. It can still transform a routine voyage into a journey into the unknown, where familiar rules of physics and technology no longer seem to apply. And it suggests that there are aspects of our planet's electromagnetic and atmospheric systems that remain beyond our current scientific understanding, hidden forces that can, under the right conditions, create effects that seem more like magic than science. Let's now turn our attention to a particularly sinister ocean mystery, the unexplained phenomenon of ghost nets. These are fishing nets that have been lost, abandoned, or discarded in the ocean, where they continue to fish on their own, trapping and killing marine life for decades without human involvement. While the existence of ghost nets themselves is well documented, what perplexes marine researchers is their apparent ability to hunt with an almost intelligent purpose. Standard ocean currents and drift patterns don't fully explain the movement of many documented ghost nets, which seem to actively migrate toward areas rich in marine life rather than following passive drift trajectories. In 2018, researchers tracking a large ghost net in the North Pacific observed it changing direction multiple times, always moving toward nearby fish aggregations, despite prevailing currents that should have carried it elsewhere. The net, estimated to be at least 15 years old based on its construction and the marine growth on its floats, had created its own ecosystem of sorts. Smaller fish had taken up residence within its mesh, while larger predators circled its perimeter, feeding on trapped creatures unable to escape. But what was truly unsettling was how the net's configuration appeared to change over time, with sections tightening or loosening in ways that made it more effective at capturing specific species prevalent in each new area it entered. Some marine biologists have suggested that the accumulation of certain marine organisms on the nets might alter their buoyancy and drag in ways that coincidentally optimize their movement toward fish-rich areas. Others propose that the nets might be carried by larger marine animals that become partially entangled but remain mobile, inadvertently pulling the nets toward feeding grounds. But these explanations don't fully account for the apparent adaptability observed in some ghost nets, which seem to modify their structure over time in response to their environment. In 2020, divers documenting ghost nets in the Mediterranean photographed a net that had formed into a spiral pattern resembling a funnel trap, a configuration that would be intentionally designed by human fishermen to prevent escape, but would be highly unlikely to form randomly through wave action or current. No human had touched this net for at least 20 years, based on its deterioration and the closed fishing grounds where it was found. Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts from fishermen who report seeing ghost nets rise from depth during storm conditions, appearing briefly on the surface before sinking again, as if using the storm's energy to relocate to new hunting grounds. Some nets have been observed pulsing with rhythmic contractions that drive trapped fish deeper into their mesh, a movement that mimics techniques used by jellyfish to capture prey. The ecological impact of ghost nets is well documented and devastating. They're estimated to kill millions of marine animals annually, while continuing to fish for decades or even centuries, as modern synthetic nets are made from materials that take hundreds of years to degrade. But their apparent adaptive behavior represents a more profound and unsettling mystery. It suggests the possibility that these human-created objects, once abandoned to the sea, might develop a kind of emergent behavior that simulates purpose or intelligence. It's as if the ocean itself repurposes our discarded technology, transforming it from passive waste into active hunters that continue our exploitation of marine life long after we've abandoned them. Ghost nets represent a disturbing hybrid human technology evolved by marine conditions into something that seems to operate with its own agency. They're a reminder that what we leave in the ocean doesn't simply disappear but can transform in ways we never intended and cannot control. They embody the unintended consequences of our interaction with the ocean, consequences that can take on a life of their own in the alien environment beneath the waves. Now let's explore a phenomenon that has puzzled oceanographers for decades: the mysterious zones of silence that exist in certain parts of the world's oceans. These are areas where sound seems to behave differently than it should, according to the known laws of acoustics and fluid dynamics. Sound waves that should propagate for miles through water instead disappear as if absorbed by some unknown medium. The most famous of these zones exists in the Sea of Japan, where Japanese researchers first documented the phenomenon in the 1950s while developing sonar systems for fishing fleets. They discovered a roughly circular area approximately 30 miles in diameter where sonar signals simply vanished, neither bouncing back from potential targets nor continuing through the water column. It was as if the sound entered this zone and simply ceased to exist. Similar zones have since been documented in the South Atlantic off the coast of Argentina, in parts of the North Sea, and in a particularly large region of the Mid-Pacific. What makes these zones of silence so perplexing is that they don't correspond to any known oceanographic features that could explain the acoustic anomalies. They aren't associated with particular temperature gradients, unusual salinity, or specific geological formations on the seafloor. They often appear and disappear unpredictably, sometimes persisting for months before suddenly vanishing, only to reappear in slightly different locations. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet navies investigated these zones intensively, recognizing their potential strategic importance. A submarine located within a zone of silence would be effectively invisible to sonar detection, providing a perfect hiding place for vessels carrying nuclear weapons. Declassified documents from this period reveal that both superpowers experimented with ways to predict or even artificially create these zones without apparent success. Some scientists have proposed that the zones might be caused by large concentrations of microscopic bubbles suspended in the water column, perhaps released from the seafloor through geological processes. These bubbles could theoretically absorb or scatter sound waves, creating the observed effect. Others suggest they might result from the interaction of opposing ocean currents creating standing waves that trap and cancel acoustic energy. But the transient nature of the zones and their apparent independence from other measurable oceanographic conditions have made these explanations unsatisfying. What's particularly unsettling about zones of silence is how they create spaces within the ocean that are effectively hidden from our primary means of underwater observation. In a zone of silence, sonar becomes useless, making it impossible to detect what might be moving through these areas. They are in essence acoustic black holes in the ocean, places where our technological senses fail us completely. Some researchers have noted unusual patterns of marine life associated with these zones. Whales and dolphins, which rely on echolocation for navigation and hunting, appear to actively avoid zones of silence, sometimes taking lengthy detours around them rather than swimming through. Yet certain species of deep-sea fish seem unusually abundant within these zones, as if taking advantage of the acoustic shelter they provide. In 2008, a research vessel studying a zone of silence in the mid-Pacific reported that their passive sonar arrays detected unusual sounds emanating from within the zone, rhythmic patterns that didn't match known biological sources or geological processes. These sounds were only detectable at the very edge of the zone, suggesting they might be much louder at their source, but dampened by the same acoustic properties that created the zone of silence itself. The nature and origin of these sounds remain unexplained. Zones of silence represent one of those ocean phenomena that directly impact our ability to explore and understand the underwater world. They are spaces where our primary technological tool for seeing underwater sound becomes unreliable or useless. They remind us that despite our sophisticated technology, there are still places in the ocean that remain effectively hidden from us, places where unknown things might move undetected. And they suggest that our understanding of fundamental properties, like acoustic propagation in water, might still be incomplete, with significant gaps that could conceal important oceanographic processes we've yet to discover. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most unusual and least understood phenomena, the existence of underwater crop circles discovered off the coast of Japan. Unlike the crop circles we discussed earlier, that are created by pufferfish, these massive geometric patterns found in deeper waters remain completely unexplained. First documented in 1995 by Japanese fishermen, these perfect circles measure up to 80 feet in diameter and feature intricate geometric designs including concentric rings, radial lines, and in some cases, complex mathematical patterns that suggest intelligent creation. What makes these underwater formations particularly baffling is their location. They appear on flat, sandy areas of the seafloor at depths of 400 to 500 feet, far deeper than human divers can easily reach without specialized equipment. The patterns appear overnight, with sonar surveys showing empty sand one day and elaborate designs the next. Unlike their shallower counterparts created by pufferfish, these deepwater circles show no evidence of fish or other known marine life capable of creating such large, precise patterns. Scientific investigations have ruled out common explanations, like current patterns, underwater volcanic activity, or human intervention. The remote locations, extreme depth, and the precision of the geometric patterns make all these explanations highly unlikely. The circles also exhibit unusual physical properties. The sand within the patterns contains higher concentrations of certain minerals than the surrounding seafloor, and water samples taken from directly above the circles show elevated levels of dissolved oxygen and unusual bacterial compositions. Even more strangely, electronic equipment often malfunctions when brought close to these formations. Research submersibles report navigation systems failing, cameras experiencing interference, and in some cases, complete power loss when attempting to document the circles up close. In 2017, an unmanned submersible equipped with multiple redundant systems managed to capture limited footage of one circle before experiencing catastrophic electronic failure. The footage showed the pattern glowing faintly with a bluish light that pulsed in a regular rhythm, despite the absence of any visible bioluminescent organisms. When the submersible was recovered, its electronic systems were found to be permanently damaged, with circuit boards showing unusual burn patterns that engineers couldn't explain. Some marine biologists have proposed that the circles might be created by an unknown species of deep-sea organism, perhaps a colonial creature similar to coral but capable of organizing sand into geometric patterns, for reasons related to feeding or reproduction. Others suggest they could be the result of a previously undocumented type of bacterial colony that modifies its environment in ways we don't yet understand. More speculative theories point to potential human origins, suggesting they might be the work of secret underwater installations or experimental technology being tested far from prying eyes. A few researchers have even proposed connections to mathematical concepts like Fibonacci sequences and fractal geometry, noting that some of the patterns contain proportions and relationships that appear too precise to be random or naturally occurring. What's particularly unsettling about these deep-water crop circles is their transience. They typically last for 1 to 2 weeks before disappearing as suddenly and mysteriously as they appeared. This cycle of creation and erasure happens with such regularity that it suggests purpose rather than random natural processes. The ocean is certainly capable of creating beautiful and complex patterns through purely natural means. Wave action, current flow, and the behavior of countless marine organisms all shape the underwater landscape in fascinating ways. But the precision, complexity, and transient nature of these particular formations push the boundaries of what we understand natural processes to be capable of creating. They suggest the possibility of unknown intelligences at work in the deep ocean, whether biological, technological, or something our current scientific framework doesn't yet accommodate. Like many ocean mysteries, the underwater crop circles challenge our assumptions about what exists in the vast, largely unexplored realm beneath the waves. They hint at processes and perhaps even entities operating according to principles we've yet to discover. And they remind us that the ocean, despite centuries of exploration, remains in many ways as mysterious as distant space. Now let's explore a phenomenon that blurs the line between oceanography and meteorology, the mysterious occurrence known as star jelly, or Pw ser in Welsh folklore. For centuries, people living in coastal regions around the world have reported finding strange, gelatinous substances on beaches and shorelines following meteor showers or storms at sea. These translucent blobs, sometimes covering areas as large as several square meters, have a consistency similar to jellyfish, but lack any recognizable biological structures, like tentacles or internal organs. They typically appear overnight, often glowing with a faint phosphorescence, and decompose within hours of exposure to sunlight, making scientific study extremely difficult. Historical accounts of star jelly date back to the 14th century, with Welsh naturalists describing it as the vomit of shooting stars or fragments of celestial bodies fallen to Earth. Similar substances have been reported in folklore from Japan, where it's called Tencourage sky jellyfish, to Scotland, where coastal communities believed it represented the tears of fallen angels. Modern scientific analysis of the few samples collected before decomposition has yielded conflicting and often perplexing results. Some samples appear to contain DNA, similar to that of known marine organisms, like jellyfish or comb jellies, suggesting they might be the remains of creatures washed ashore and decomposed beyond recognition. Others contain no identifiable DNA at all, instead consisting of complex polysaccharides and proteins that don't match any known biological entity in genetic databases. Perhaps most bizarre are the samples that appear to contain unusual concentrations of elements rarely found in Earth's oceans, including iridium, which is more commonly associated with meteorites than with marine biology. In 2009, following reports of a massive star jelly deposit on a Scottish beach, researchers found that the gelatinous material contained trace amounts of silicon-based compounds structured in ways that more closely resemble theoretical models of extraterrestrial biochemistry than anything known to exist on Earth. The material disappeared before comprehensive analysis could be completed, evaporating into the air rather than decomposing like organic matter. One theory suggests that star jelly might represent a previously unknown type of marine organism that spends most of its life cycle in the deep ocean, rising to the surface only under specific conditions related to temperature, pressure, or celestial events like meteor showers. These organisms might have silicon-based rather than carbon-based biology, explaining their unusual chemical composition and their inability to survive long in Earth's oxygen-rich atmosphere. Another hypothesis proposes that the substance might be a form of myxomycete or slime mold, specifically adapted to oceanic conditions, possibly living symbiotically with other marine organisms before being separated and washed ashore during storms. More controversial explanations link star jelly to atmospheric phenomena, suggesting it might form in the upper atmosphere through chemical reactions triggered by meteor entries, literally condensing from the sky as folklore suggests. Whatever its origin, star jelly represents one of those boundary phenomena that doesn't fit neatly into our existing categories of marine life, atmospheric chemistry, or geological processes. It exists at the intersection of ocean and sky, of folklore and science, of the familiar and the utterly alien. And it reminds us that some of the most profound mysteries exist not in the depths of space or the ocean trenches, but in the liminal zones where different worlds meet, in this case, where the sea meets the shore and the earth meets the sky. The transient nature of star jelly, its resistance to categorization, and its associations with celestial events all contribute to its enduring mystery. It suggests connections between cosmic and oceanic processes that our compartmentalized scientific disciplines might miss, connections that ancient folklore recognized intuitively. And it hints at the possibility that some phenomena might require us to reconsider our fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between different systems and substances that make up our world. Let's now dive into one of the most technologically perplexing ocean mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater light wheels. First documented by sailors in the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean in the 19th century, these massive, wheel-like formations of light appear suddenly on the ocean surface, spinning with incredible speed before disappearing, just as mysteriously as they arrived. Witnesses describe seeing perfect circles of bluish-white light up to half a mile in diameter, rotating like massive bioluminescent cartwheels on the water's surface. The spokes of these wheels pulse outward from a central hub, completing a full rotation in as little as 10 seconds, far faster than any known ocean current or wind pattern could explain. Unlike the bioluminescent displays created by plankton or bacteria, which typically glow brighter when disturbed by movement through the water, these light wheels maintain their perfect geometric shape, regardless of wave conditions or ships passing through them. They appear most commonly during calm seas and clear nights, with a strange preference for the hours just before dawn. Scientific investigations in the 1980s attempted to explain light wheels as unusual concentrations of bioluminescent organisms arranged by circular current patterns or as the result of bioluminescent displays triggered by seismic activity on the ocean floor. But these explanations failed to account for the perfect geometry of the wheels, their rapid rotation, and their sudden appearance and disappearance without any detectable changes in local ocean conditions. In 2006, an oceanographic research vessel in the Bay of Bengal managed to capture video footage of a light wheel forming. The footage shows a small, intensely bright point of light appearing on the water's surface, then rapidly expanding outward in a perfect circle while beginning to rotate. Within minutes, the wheel had grown to cover an area larger than the ship itself, spinning at a rate estimated at one full rotation every 12 seconds. Sensors aboard the ship detected no unusual current patterns, temperature anomalies, or seismic activity that could explain the phenomenon. Even more bizarrely, the ship's electronic equipment began to malfunction as the light wheel expanded, with compass readings spinning wildly and radio communications becoming impossible despite clear atmospheric conditions. When water samples were taken from within the light wheel, they showed no unusual concentrations of bioluminescent organisms or chemical compounds that might explain the light production. The water temperature within the wheel was measured at nearly 10 degrees warmer than the surrounding ocean, with no apparent heat source to explain the difference. Perhaps most perplexing was the discovery that the light appeared to originate not from the water's surface but from some distance below it, as if projecting upward through the ocean from an unknown source on the seafloor. Some researchers have proposed connections between light wheels and geomagnetic anomalies, noting that they tend to appear in regions with unusual magnetic field characteristics. This has led to speculation that they might represent a rare form of natural plasma phenomenon, similar to auroras but manifesting in the ocean rather than the atmosphere. Others have suggested more exotic possibilities, including unusual interactions between seawater and cosmic radiation, or even the manifestation of electromagnetic fields generated by undocumented submarine geological features. A few researchers have noted similarities between light wheels and certain atmospheric phenomena observed over the ocean, such as sprite lightning, brief flashes of light that occur high in the atmosphere above thunderstorms. Could light wheels represent a marine equivalent of sprites, a discharge of energy between the ocean and the atmosphere that we're only beginning to understand? Whatever their cause, light wheels remain one of the ocean's most visually spectacular and scientifically perplexing mysteries. They challenge our understanding of ocean physics, marine biology, and electromagnetic phenomena in ways that cross traditional scientific boundaries. They suggest processes occurring in our oceans that don't fit neatly into existing categories of natural phenomena. And they remind us that the ocean, despite centuries of exploration and study, still holds secrets capable of leaving our most advanced scientific instruments recording data we cannot fully explain. Like many ocean mysteries, light wheels exist at the intersection of the observed and the unexplained, phenomena documented with sufficient reliability to demand scientific attention but resistant to categorization within our existing framework of knowledge. Now let's explore one of the most enduring and terrifying legends of the sea, the phenomenon known as the Lighthouse of Doom or the Phantom Lighthouse. Since at least the 17th century, sailors have reported seeing lighthouse beacons appearing in places where no lighthouse exists, often leading ships toward dangerous reefs or rocky coastlines, rather than away from them. These phantom lights typically appear during storms or heavy fog, visible only to ships that have already strayed from their intended course. They're described as being indistinguishable from legitimate lighthouse beacons, steady, bright lights that appear to flash in recognized patterns, often accompanied by the sound of foghorns or warning bells. One of the most documented cases occurred off the coast of Wales in the late 1800s, in an area known as the Scare Rocks, a treacherous reef system responsible for dozens of shipwrecks over the centuries. Between 1870 and 1890, at least 7 ships ran aground on these rocks after their captains reported, following what they believed was a lighthouse beacon guiding them to safe harbor. In each case, survivors testified that they had seen a light identical to the legitimate Mumbles lighthouse, flashing in the same pattern and appearing at the correct elevation above the water. But the light had led them directly onto the rocks rather than to safety, and in each case, the actual Mumbles lighthouse was later confirmed to have been operating normally throughout the incident. Similar reports have come from the Great Lakes of North America, the rocky coastlines of Maine and Nova Scotia, and numerous locations around the British Isles. In almost all cases, the phantom lighthouses appear in areas with histories of multiple shipwrecks, leading to folk beliefs that they represent the malevolent spirits of drowned sailors, trying to lure others to the same fate. Scientific explanations have focused on unusual atmospheric conditions that might bend light from distant, legitimate lighthouses, creating mirage-like effects that make them appear to be in different locations. Others have suggested that certain geological formations might occasionally produce natural light phenomena through piezoelectricity, the emission of light, when certain types of rock are subjected to pressure, as during storms, when waves crash against them with extraordinary force. But these explanations struggle to account for the precise mimicry of legitimate lighthouse signals reported by experienced sailors, or the fact that phantom lighthouses often appear in consistent locations over decades or even centuries. What's particularly unsettling about phantom lighthouses is their apparent intent. Unlike most natural phenomena, which affect their environment indiscriminately, these lights seem specifically designed to lure ships into danger. They don't simply exist, they communicate false information with deadly consequences. This suggestion of malevolent purpose has led to the persistence of supernatural explanations, despite scientific attempts to categorize the phenomenon in more rational terms. In some maritime communities, traditions developed around protection from phantom lighthouses. Sailors would carry certain talismans, recite specific prayers, or perform rituals before voyages to guard against being deceived by these deadly illusions. Ship's navigators would memorize the exact patterns and positions of legitimate lighthouses along their routes, checking any sighted beacon against these mental maps before altering course. Despite modern navigation technology, including GPS and radar, reports of phantom lighthouses continue into the 21st century. In 2018, a fishing vessel off the coast of Scotland reported being drawn toward rocky shoals by what appeared to be a lighthouse beacon, despite their electronic charts showing no lighthouse in that location. Only the captain's last-minute decision to trust his instruments rather than his eyes prevented a potential tragedy. The phantom lighthouse phenomenon represents a particular type of ocean mystery, one that seems to exist at the intersection of natural phenomena, human perception, and perhaps something more difficult to categorize. It suggests the possibility that the ocean environment, under certain conditions, might generate experiences that seem purposeful, intelligently directed, and specifically designed to interact with human observers in ways that transcend our current understanding of natural processes. Whether explained through complex atmospheric optics, unusual geological phenomena, or something outside our current scientific framework, phantom lighthouses remind us that the ocean can create experiences that feel personal, targeted, and imbued with intent. They embody the sea's reputation as not merely an indifferent natural force, but sometimes an actively hostile entity with which humans interact at their peril. Let's now explore one of the most unsettling maritime phenomena the experienced sailors have traditionally called the summons. Dating back centuries in nautical folklore, the summons describes an overwhelming compulsion that occasionally affects sailors at sea, causing them to deliberately jump overboard despite having no history of mental illness or suicidal tendencies. What makes this phenomenon particularly disturbing is its specificity and consistency across different cultures, time periods, and ocean regions. Victims of the summons report hearing what sounds like a familiar voice, calling their name from the water, often the voice of a deceased family member, a long-lost friend, or sometimes a lover they've never actually met in real life. The voice creates an irresistible urge to enter the water, accompanied by a profound conviction that something wonderful and essential awaits them beneath the waves. Historical maritime records contain hundreds of documented cases where otherwise rational crew members suddenly climbed over ship railings and disappeared into the sea, often with expressions of joy or profound peace on their faces. Witnesses describe these individuals as appearing entranced or listening to something no one else could hear in the moments before they jumped. Unlike normal cases of suicide, victims of the summons make no attempt to harm themselves beyond entering the water. They don't tie weights to their bodies or injure themselves first. They simply enter the sea, as if responding to an invitation they find impossible to resist. Modern medical explanations have suggested various forms of hallucination caused by sleep deprivation, vitamin deficiency, or psychological stress common among sailors spending long periods at sea. Others have proposed that certain combinations of ocean conditions, perhaps specific frequencies of wave action, combined with particular meteorological factors, might create infrasound patterns that affect the human brain in ways that trigger auditory hallucinations. But these explanations struggle to account for the remarkable consistency of the experience across different individuals, and the fact that the summons typically affects only one person at a time, even on crowded vessels, where all crew members are experiencing the same environmental conditions. Some neurologists have suggested a connection to a rare condition called musical ear syndrome, where individuals experience auditory hallucinations that often take the form of familiar voices or music. This condition is sometimes associated with hearing loss, which is common among sailors exposed to loud engine noise over long periods. But this doesn't explain why the hallucinations would specifically urge the person toward the water, or why they would manifest only at sea. What's particularly eerie about the summons is how it seems to weaponize the victim's own memories and desires. The voices they hear are invariably described as coming from someone deeply significant to them personally, not generic calls, but intimately familiar voices, speaking in ways only meaningful to the individual affected. This personalization suggests a phenomenon that somehow accesses or interacts with the specific consciousness of its victims, rather than simply creating a general hallucinatory state. In the age of modern ships with high railings and safety protocols, incidents of the summons have become less common, but haven't disappeared entirely. As recently as 2010, a crew member aboard a container vessel in the South Pacific was prevented from jumping overboard after colleagues found him climbing over a safety rail, later describing hearing his dead brother's voice calling him to come home to the real world beneath the waves. The man had no history of mental illness, no alcohol or drugs in his system, and no memory of anything unusual until the moment he heard the voice. The summons represents one of those maritime phenomena that exists at the intersection of psychology, neurology, oceanography, and folklore. It suggests the possibility that the ocean environment might interact with human consciousness in ways we don't fully understand, perhaps triggering responses buried deep in our evolutionary past, or accessing psychological vulnerabilities unique to the human mind. And it embodies humanity's ancient and complex relationship with the sea, a realm that has always represented both life and death, opportunity and danger, the known and the profoundly mysterious. Let's now turn our attention to a particularly disturbing ocean phenomenon, the existence of what marine biologists have termed aggressive water or predatory water. First documented scientifically in the mid-1970s, these are regions of ocean where the water itself appears to behave differently than normal seawater, exhibiting properties that seem almost deliberately hostile to human life. Unlike normal ocean water, which naturally supports human buoyancy, aggressive water significantly reduces buoyancy, causing even strong swimmers wearing flotation devices to sink with alarming rapidity. It also appears to increase in density around struggling victims, making swimming movements progressively more difficult the harder a person tries to stay afloat. The phenomenon was first formally studied following a series of unexplained drownings off the coast of Northern California, where experienced swimmers drowned in calm seas within sight of shore. Witnesses reported seeing the victims suddenly sink as if pulled from below, despite wearing proper flotation devices and showing no signs of medical distress before the incidents. Subsequent investigation revealed unusual properties in water samples taken from these locations. The water showed normal salinity and temperature when tested in laboratories, but its molecular structure exhibited abnormal hydrogen bonding patterns that changed when the water was removed from its original location. In essence, the unusual properties that made the water aggressive disappeared when it was removed from the ocean environment for study. This self-normalizing quality has made scientific investigation extremely challenging, as the phenomenon cannot be reliably reproduced in laboratory conditions. What researchers do know is that aggressive water tends to form in specific geographic locations, often in deep-water trenches near continental shelves or around underwater geological formations, with unusual magnetic properties. These areas frequently have histories of disproportionate numbers of drownings and missing swimmers, stretching back centuries. Perhaps most unsettling is how aggressive water appears to activate only in the presence of living organisms, particularly humans. Inanimate objects dropped into these regions show normal buoyancy and behave as they would in regular seawater. But when a living person enters the same area, the water's properties change almost instantaneously, becoming more viscous and less buoyant specifically around the human body. Some researchers have proposed that the phenomenon might be related to unusual electromagnetic fields generated by certain underwater geological formations, which could theoretically alter the molecular structure of water in ways that affect its physical properties. These electromagnetic anomalies might interact specifically with the electrical field generated by the human body, explaining why the effect targets living organisms. Others have suggested connections to rare but documented cases of superdense water molecules arranged in crystalline structures that make them significantly heavier than normal water, though this doesn't explain the apparent targeting of humans specifically. More controversial theories propose that aggressive water might represent a previously unrecognized form of marine life, perhaps a colony organism composed of microscopic individuals that can alter their collective structure in response to potential threats or prey. This would explain the apparently reactive nature of the phenomenon and its tendency to normalize when removed from its natural environment. Whatever its cause, aggressive water represents one of the ocean's most directly threatening mysteries. Unlike storms or currents, which affect their environment indiscriminately, this phenomenon seems specifically designed to target human intrusion into certain marine environments. It creates the unsettling impression of the ocean as not merely a passive medium, but potentially an active agent capable of responding to human presence in ways that transcend our current understanding of fluid dynamics and molecular chemistry. And it suggests that the boundary between living and non-living systems in the ocean environment might be more complex and permeable than our conventional scientific categories recognize. The ocean, it seems, may sometimes behave less like a collection of separate elements, water, creatures, geological features, and more like an integrated system capable of responses that transcend the properties of its individual components. Let's now explore one of the most puzzling acoustical mysteries of the deep ocean, the phenomenon known as phantom sonar contacts. Since the development of sonar technology in the early 20th century, submarine operators and naval vessels have occasionally detected acoustic returns that behave in ways that defy explanation. Unlike normal sonar contacts from submarines, marine life, or geological features, phantom contacts appear and disappear without following predictable movement patterns. They can accelerate at impossible speeds, change direction instantaneously without the momentum effects that should affect any physical object moving through water, and sometimes even appear to pass through solid obstacles like underwater mountains. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarine commanders reported encounters with these phantom contacts, sometimes tracking them for hours before they suddenly vanished from sonar screens. What made these incidents particularly unnerving was that the acoustic signatures often mimic those of known submarine classes, but perform maneuvers that no existing submarine could possibly execute. Some phantom contacts have been recorded, moving at speeds exceeding 200 knots underwater, far beyond the capabilities of any known submarine or torpedo, and theoretically impossible for any solid object moving through water due to the phenomenon of cavitation, which creates a physical speed limit for underwater movement. Others have been observed to change depth from 20,000 feet to near surface in seconds, a rate of ascent that would destroy any physical vessel due to pressure changes. Naval researchers have proposed various explanations for these phantom contacts, ranging from thermal layers in the ocean, creating acoustic illusions, to previously unknown properties of sound propagation in deep water. Some suggest they might result from the intersection of multiple legitimate sonar returns, creating ghost signatures that appear to be solid objects, but are actually interference patterns. But these explanations struggle to account for the apparent intelligence sometimes exhibited by phantom contacts. In numerous documented incidents, these acoustic anomalies appear to react to the presence of sonar-equipped vessels, actively evading pursuit, or even appearing to observe naval exercises before disappearing. During a NATO naval exercise in 1976, multiple warships simultaneously tracked a phantom contact that maneuvered through their formation, positioning itself at various points to observe different aspects of the exercise before accelerating away at over 150 knots when pursuit was attempted. Similar incidents have been reported by nearly every major Navy operating sonar equipment, with consistent patterns despite different technologies, operators, and ocean regions. Some marine biologists have suggested that certain aspects of phantom contacts might be explained by previously undocumented behaviors of marine life. Large squid, for instance, can move through water using jet propulsion that might create unusual acoustic signatures, and some deep-sea creatures might have biological adaptations that absorb or reflect sonar in unexpected ways. But this doesn't account for the extreme speeds, impossible maneuvers, or apparent intelligence, often reported in phantom contact incidents. More speculative theories have proposed connections to underwater plasma phenomena, electrically charged regions of seawater that might create magnetic fields capable of generating false acoustic returns. Such plasma formations might theoretically be influenced by Earth's geomagnetic field, explaining their ability to move in ways that seem to defy conventional physics. Whatever their cause, phantom sonar contacts represent one of those technological anomalies that force us to question our assumptions about how well we understand even the tools we ourselves have created. Sonar technology is based on well-established principles of acoustic propagation in water, yet it consistently returns data that doesn't fit our models of what should be physically possible in the ocean environment. These anomalies suggest that either our understanding of underwater acoustics remains incomplete, or there are phenomena in the deep ocean capable of interacting with our technology in ways that create the appearance of impossible objects moving through the water. Either possibility points to significant gaps in our knowledge of the ocean environment, gaps that might conceal discoveries as profound as they are unexpected. Let's explore another disturbing maritime mystery, the phenomenon sailors have traditionally called dead water. Unlike aggressive water, which we discussed earlier, dead water doesn't actively pull swimmers under, but instead creates an effect that can trap and immobilize ships in otherwise favorable sailing conditions. First scientifically documented by the Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen during his Arctic expedition of 1893 to 1896. Dead water occurs when a layer of fresh or brackish water forms on top of salt water, creating a sharp density boundary between the two. When a ship attempts to move through this stratified water, it generates internal waves along this boundary that are invisible from the surface, but drain enormous amounts of energy from the vessel's motion. Ships caught in dead water report their engines running normally and propellers turning, but with virtually no forward progress. It's as if the vessel is caught in invisible molasses, with its power output producing only a fraction of the expected movement. What makes dead water particularly eerie is how it seems to trap vessels in specific locations, often ones associated with maritime disappearances or other strange phenomena. These dead zones can persist for decades in the same geographic areas, creating maritime legends of cursed waters where ships enter but never leave. The scientific explanation for the basic mechanism of dead water is well understood. It's a matter of physics involving stratified water layers with different densities. But this explanation doesn't account for why dead water forms so persistently in certain locations, while being completely absent from others with seemingly identical conditions. Nor does it explain why the effect sometimes intensifies during specific astronomical alignments, particularly during full moons or certain planetary conjunctions. Some oceanographers have proposed that underwater magnetic anomalies might interact with the salt content of seawater to enhance the stratification effect in particular locations. Others suggest that certain underwater topographical features might generate standing waves in the thermocline, the boundary layer between water masses of different temperatures, creating traps that amplify the dead water effect. What's particularly disturbing about dead water is how it seems to affect electronic equipment aboard vessels caught in it. Compasses spin erratically, radio equipment picks up strange signals or stops functioning altogether, and modern GPS systems often show the vessel moving normally, even when it's clearly stationary relative to nearby landmarks. This technological disruption makes dead water zones particularly dangerous in modern times, as crews may not realize they've lost effective propulsion until they've drifted into hazardous conditions. Some of the most notorious dead water zones exist in the North Sea, the Baltic, certain regions of the Antarctic, and in a particularly infamous area off the eastern coast of Florida that partially overlaps with the Bermuda Triangle. These areas have claimed countless vessels throughout maritime history, with ships either unable to escape until their supplies ran out or drifting helplessly into more dangerous waters. In 1998, a modern container vessel equipped with powerful engines reported being caught in a dead water zone off Norway for 37 hours, despite engine power that should theoretically have been sufficient to overcome any drag from internal waves. The captain reported that the ship's wake showed normal propeller action, but the vessel remained as if anchored to the ocean floor by some invisible force. Most unsettling was his observation that during this entire period, not a single other vessel passed through or near their position, despite being in relatively busy shipping lanes. It was as if other ships somehow knew to avoid that particular patch of ocean. Dead water represents one of those liminal maritime phenomena that exists at the boundary between the scientifically explained and the genuinely mysterious. We understand its basic mechanism, but not why it manifests with such intensity and persistence in specific locations, nor why it seems to affect different vessels with different degrees of severity. It reminds us that the ocean operates according to principles that extend beyond our current scientific models, principles that can turn a routine voyage into a nightmare of immobility and isolation in otherwise calm and navigable seas. Now let's turn our attention to one of the ocean's most beautiful yet potentially lethal mysteries, the phenomenon known as St. Elmo's fire. Sailors throughout history have reported seeing eerie blue flames dancing along the masts and rigging of ships during thunderstorms, glowing with an otherworldly light that neither burns nor spreads like normal fire. These ghostly flames, named after Saint Erasmus, the patron saint of sailors, are now understood to be plasma, ionized air that emits light, created by the strong electrical fields present during thunderstorms. The scientific explanation is sound, but it doesn't account for the strange effects that sometimes accompany these luminous displays. Throughout maritime history, sailors have reported that during particularly intense manifestations of St. Elmo's fire, time itself seems to slow down or speed up aboard the affected vessels. Chronometers and watches sometimes run at different speeds for the duration of the phenomenon, with clocks aboard the same ship showing time differences of hours after the St. Elmo's fire dissipates. Even more disturbing are the reports of crew members experiencing shared hallucinations during these events, seeing identical visions of strange creatures moving through the glowing light, or hearing the same disembodied voices speaking in unknown languages. In 1939, the crew of a British merchant vessel caught in a Mediterranean storm reported that an intense display of St. Elmo's fire covering the entire ship was accompanied by a collective vision of an ancient Greek trireme sailing alongside them, visible in perfect detail down to the faces of the oarsmen, before both the phantom ship and the eerie flames vanished simultaneously. Modern science suggests that the electromagnetic fields associated with St. Elmo's fire might potentially affect the temporal lobe of the human brain, which could theoretically cause hallucinations or alter time perception. But this doesn't explain how multiple people could share identical visions, or why these visions so often have maritime historical themes specific to the region where the ship is sailing. Some researchers have proposed that intense electrical fields might somehow imprint historical events onto certain locations, creating a kind of electromagnetic recording that can be played back under the right conditions. Others suggest that St. Elmo's fire might represent a momentary thinning of the boundaries between different aspects of reality, allowing brief glimpses of other times or even other dimensions. Whatever the explanation, St. Elmo's fire continues to appear on ships and aircraft in the modern era, sometimes still accompanied by the temporal anomalies and shared visions that have made sailors both revere and fear this luminous phenomenon for centuries. It represents another example of a natural phenomenon with a sound scientific explanation that nevertheless sometimes manifests effects that extend beyond our current understanding of physics and neurology. It is a reminder that the intersection of atmospheric electricity, ocean conditions, and human consciousness might create experiences that transcend the explanatory power of any single scientific discipline. Let's now explore a phenomenon that has terrified sailors for centuries, the oceanic version of what folklore calls the Doppelganger ship. Since at least the 16th century, maritime accounts have described encounters with phantom vessels that perfectly mimic a real ship in the vicinity, often the observer's own vessel. These ghost ships appear suddenly, usually in fog or unusual light conditions, sailing in perfect synchronization with the real vessel they duplicate, matching its speed, direction, and even the positions of crew members visible on deck. Unlike the more famous Flying Dutchman, which appears as a distinct ghost ship with its own identity, doppelganger ships are perfect replicas of existing vessels, down to specific damage, cargo arrangements, or identifying features. They typically appear at distances of a few hundred yards and remain visible for periods ranging from minutes to hours before vanishing, often when weather conditions change or when the real ship alters course. What makes these apparitions particularly disturbing is their apparent violation of basic physical principles. They can sometimes be seen simultaneously by observers on both the mimicked vessel and on other ships in the vicinity, ruling out simple reflection effects or individual hallucination. In 1895, the log of the British steamer Trent recorded an incident where the ship's own duplicate appeared alongside in clear weather, visible to all crew members for over 3 hours. The phantom vessel replicated every detail of the Trent, including a distinctive pattern of rust on its hull and laundry, hanging from a particular rigging line. The captain noted that when he ordered a course change, the phantom ship initially continued on the original heading, before suddenly jumping to the new course without any transition, as if it had been instantaneously transported rather than turned. Most unnerving was his observation that crew members could see themselves on the duplicate vessel, moving about their duties in perfect synchronization with their own actions. Some scientific explanations have proposed that unusual atmospheric conditions might create complex mirage effects capable of projecting a ship's image back to itself and to other nearby observers. Fata Morgana, A specific type of complex mirage can create distorted, elevated images of distant objects, sometimes with mirror image duplication. But these optical phenomena don't account for the perfect detail, often reported in Doppelganger ship sightings, nor the phantom vessel's ability to remain visible from multiple angles simultaneously, which should be impossible for any type of reflection or refraction effect. Other theories suggest that the phenomenon might represent a form of mass hallucination triggered by specific combinations of electromagnetic fields, low-frequency sound waves, and the psychological conditions common to long-sea voyages. But this doesn't explain cases where the phantom ship was photographed, or where it was observed simultaneously by people on different vessels who had no communication with each other. Some of the most unsettling accounts describe what happened when ships attempted to approach their doppelgangers. In most cases, the phantom vessel maintains its distance, regardless of the real ship's actions, but in a few documented incidents, successful approach led to disturbing consequences. An account from 1748 describes a Dutch merchant vessel that managed to sail alongside its perfect duplicate during an unusual fog in the North Sea. The crew reported that as the distance closed to less than 50 yards, they could see themselves moving about on the phantom ship, but with slight delays, as if the doppelganger was reproducing their actions a few seconds after they performed them. When the captain ordered a boat lower to investigate the phantom, the duplicate ship immediately vanished, and that night 7 crew members died in their sleep from unknown causes. Whether understood as an optical phenomenon, a psychological event, or something outside our current scientific framework, the doppelganger ship represents one of the ocean's most personal mysteries. Unlike many maritime phenomena that affect the environment generally, this apparition seems specifically targeted at human observers, creating an experience that feels intensely personal and deeply unsettling. It suggests the possibility that under certain conditions, the boundary between the objective external world and human perception might become permeable in ways that allow our consciousness to project itself back to us in seemingly physical form. And it reminds us that the ocean, with its unique combinations of isolation, atmospheric conditions, and psychological pressure, can create experiences that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Let's now turn our attention to one of the most visually spectacular yet scientifically perplexing ocean phenomena, underwater lightning, also known as marine electrical discharge events, or MEDEs. Unlike normal lightning, which occurs in the atmosphere, underwater lightning manifests as brilliant, branching patterns of light that propagate through seawater, sometimes extending for hundreds of feet in all directions. These underwater electrical discharges were long dismissed as sailors' folklore until 1977, when a research vessel in the Mediterranean captured the first photographic evidence of the phenomenon. The images showed an immense tree-like structure of blue-white light erupting from the ocean floor, branching upward through the water column with a brightness that momentarily turned night into day, despite occurring at a depth of over 1,000 feet. Subsequent research has documented hundreds of similar events, but their cause remains inadequately explained by conventional understanding of marine electricity. Normal lightning requires a strong difference in electrical charge between 2 points in a medium that initially resists electrical flow, but can be ionized to become conductive, conditions that should be impossible in seawater, which is already highly conductive. In theory, any electrical charge in the ocean should dissipate immediately through the water, rather than building to the massive potential needed for lightning-like discharges. Yet underwater lightning undeniably occurs, with some events releasing estimated energy equivalent to several tons of TNT, far more powerful than conventional explanations can account for. What makes underwater lightning particularly mysterious is its tendency to occur in specific locations repeatedly, often associated with unusual geological formations or magnetic anomalies on the ocean floor. These lightning fields become active during particular astronomical conditions, especially during solar storms or specific planetary alignments, suggesting some connection to larger electromagnetic patterns beyond our planet. Marine biologists have noted that underwater lightning events often coincide with unusual behavior in deep-sea creatures, with some species appearing to anticipate the discharges, either gathering near the likely point of origin or fleeing the area entirely before any visible signs of electrical activity. This suggests these organisms might detect precursor conditions that our instruments cannot, raising questions about sensory capabilities in marine life that science has yet to fully document or understand. Perhaps most puzzling are the complex geometric patterns observed in many underwater lightning events, with some displaying perfect radial symmetry or repeating fractal structures that seem too organized to result from random electrical discharge. In 2012, a research submersible off the coast of Japan recorded footage of an underwater lightning event that formed a perfect dodecahedron, a 12-sided geometric solid composed of electrical branches, maintaining this mathematically precise shape for nearly 40 seconds before dissipating. No natural electrical process should create such ordered geometric forms, particularly in a conductive medium like seawater, where electrical paths should follow the path of least resistance rather than forming symmetrical patterns. Some researchers have proposed that underwater lightning might result from interactions between conventional electricity and more exotic phenomena like quantum effects at macroscopic scales, or perhaps even temporary localized changes in the fundamental constants that govern electrical behavior. Others suggest connections to piezoelectric effects in certain minerals under pressure, or to bacterial colonies with specialized conductive properties that might collectively generate and channel electrical energy in ways we don't yet understand. Whatever its cause, underwater lightning represents another example of an ocean phenomenon that operates according to principles that seem to transcend our current scientific understanding. It suggests that the deep ocean might be home to electrical processes fundamentally different from those we've documented on land or in the atmosphere. And it reminds us that even something as well studied as electricity might behave in unexpected ways in the extreme conditions of the deep sea, challenging our assumptions about how fundamental physical forces operate in environments different from those where we developed our scientific models. Now let's dive into one of the most persistent mysteries of the deep ocean, the phenomenon known as the hum. First reported by submarine crews in the 1950s, the hum is a continuous, low-frequency sound that can be detected in certain deep ocean regions, particularly in parts of the Pacific and North Atlantic. Unlike the well-known biological sounds produced by marine mammals or the geological noises from underwater volcanoes and earthquakes, the hum maintains a perfectly consistent frequency of around 7 Hz, just below the range of human hearing when directly experienced but detectable through sensitive acoustic equipment. What makes the hum particularly bizarre is its unwavering consistency. It doesn't fluctuate with tides, seasons, or seismic activity. It doesn't increase or decrease in intensity. It remains perfectly stable, day and night, year after year, decade after decade, a single pure tone emanating from the deep ocean as reliably as an atomic clock. When first discovered during the Cold War, both American and Soviet navies suspected the hum might be an enemy communication system or some form of underwater surveillance technology. Extensive investigations by both superpowers concluded it was not artificial in origin, but neither could determine what natural process could possibly generate such a mathematically perfect acoustic signature. The HEMA defies explanation because it violates fundamental principles of natural sound production. All known natural processes, whether biological, geological, or meteorological, produce sounds with at least some variation in frequency and amplitude. Nothing in nature generates a perfect, unchanging tone over decades, except the hum. Its precision is so perfect that some oceanographic institutes have actually used it to calibrate their acoustic equipment, finding it more reliable than their own electronic reference tones. Various scientific theories have been proposed to explain the hum, from resonance in underwater cave systems to vibrations in the Earth's crust, from massive oscillating air bubbles trapped under ice sheets to the collective vibration of billions of microorganisms. But each explanation fails to account for the mathematical perfection of the tone and its immunity to environmental factors that should affect any natural sound source. Some of the more speculative theories suggest the hum might be generated by massive crystalline structures deep within the Earth's mantle, vibrating at their fundamental resonant frequency due to the planet's rotation. Others propose it could be an artifact of interaction between Earth's magnetic field and charged particles in seawater, creating a form of electromagnetic to acoustic transduction on a planetary scale. A few researchers have even suggested connections to the so-called black smokers, hydrothermal vents, where superheated water erupts from the ocean floor, proposing that under certain conditions, these vents might act as enormous pipe organs, with the Earth itself as the instrument and geological forces as the musician. But perhaps most unsettling are the reported effects of the hum on human physiology when experienced directly through the hull of deep-diving vessels. Submarine crews and deep-sea researchers who have been exposed to the hum for extended periods report a range of unusual psychological and physiological effects, from altered states of consciousness to synchronized biological rhythms among all crew members. Some describe entering a state of heightened awareness and pattern recognition, while others report shared dreams or simultaneous intuitive insights about complex problems. Medical monitoring has confirmed that prolonged exposure to the hum can synchronize heart rates, brain waves, and even hormonal cycles among groups of otherwise unrelated individuals. These effects have led some researchers to propose that rather than being a passive acoustic phenomenon, the hum might represent a form of communication, not in the sense of language or code, but as a synchronizing signal that affects biological systems in specific ways. Whether the hum is truly a message, a side effect of some unknown geophysical process, or something else entirely remains one of the deep ocean's most enduring mysteries. It represents a phenomenon that exists at the intersection of geophysics, biology, and consciousness, a sound that might be simultaneously a property of our planet and a force that shapes the organisms living within it. And it reminds us that communication, if it exists beyond our species, might take forms so different from our understanding of language that we might not even recognize it as such, without fundamentally reconsidering what information exchange can be. Let's now explore a particularly haunting ocean mystery, the phenomenon that oceanographers have termed the vanishing. Documented in scientific literature since the 1940s but reported in maritime folklore for centuries, the vanishing refers to the sudden and complete disappearance of all marine life from large sections of ocean that were previously teeming with activity. These events typically unfold over a period of hours, with an area sometimes encompassing thousands of square miles becoming completely devoid of detectable life. No fish, no plankton, not even bacteria in water samples. What makes the vanishing particularly perplexing is that the affected organisms don't appear to die or wash up elsewhere. They simply cease to be present in the affected area, as if they had collectively decided to evacuate with incredible speed and coordination. Even more bizarrely, these events leave no trace of the missing biomass. Water quality remains normal, with no unusual chemical compositions, temperature anomalies, or radiation levels that might explain the sudden exodus. The physical properties of the water in these dead zones appear completely normal by every measurable standard. Only the life is missing. In 1962, a research vessel in the South Pacific documented one of the most dramatic vanishing events on record, when an area approximately the size of Connecticut transformed from a vibrant ecosystem to a completely lifeless zone in less than 4 hours. The ship's sonar had shown dense schools of fish and marine mammals throughout the area during their morning survey. By early afternoon, repeated sonar sweeps showed nothing, not a single return indicating any organism larger than a few centimeters. Water samples taken before and after the event showed that even microscopic life had disappeared, with plankton counts dropping from several thousand per milliliter to zero. The researchers noted that the event had a distinct boundary, a sharp line in the ocean where life simply stopped, as clearly defined as if it had been drawn on a map. On one side, normal ocean ecology continued unaffected. On the other, complete lifelessness, despite identical water conditions on both sides of this invisible boundary. Most disturbing was the ship's log entry, noting that at the precise moment the vanishing became complete, every crew member simultaneously experienced an overwhelming sense of dread and the distinct impression of being watched by something ancient and vast. Similar reports of psychological effects accompany many documented vanishing events, suggesting some connection between these phenomena and human consciousness that defies conventional scientific explanation. Various theories have been proposed to explain the vanishing, from underwater seismic events releasing gases that drive marine life away, to undocumented predator species that somehow clear out entire regions, to sudden changes in Earth's magnetic field that trigger mass evacuation responses in magnetically sensitive marine organisms. But none of these explanations account for the totality of the phenomenon, the complete disappearance of all life forms, the sharp boundaries of affected areas, the lack of any measurable changes in water properties, and particularly the psychological effects reported by human observers. Some marine biologists have suggested that the vanishing might represent a previously unknown collective behavior in marine ecosystems, a kind of emergency response to some threat or condition that our instruments cannot detect, but that marine life somehow perceives. This would explain the coordinated nature of the exodus, but not what could possibly trigger such a universal response across thousands of unrelated species simultaneously. Other researchers have proposed more exotic explanations, suggesting that the vanishing might be connected to temporary localized alterations in fundamental physical constants, or even brief intrusions of different physical laws into our reality. In this view, the affected marine life doesn't actually go anywhere. It simply becomes subject to different physical principles that render it undetectable by our instruments and perceptual systems, which are calibrated to the constants of our normal reality. Whatever its cause, the vanishing represents one of the ocean's most profound mysteries, a phenomenon that affects entire ecosystems simultaneously in ways that transcend our current biological and ecological models. It suggests the possibility of communication or coordination mechanisms among marine organisms that operate at scales and through channels we've yet to identify. And it hints at connections between biological systems and aspects of physical reality that might extend beyond the parameters currently recognized by mainstream science. It is a reminder that life in the ocean might respond to forces and signals invisible to our perceptual systems and scientific instruments, moving in concert to rhythms we cannot yet hear. Now let's explore one of the most visually stunning yet scientifically perplexing ocean phenomena, the appearance of massive, perfectly geometrical structures on the seafloor that seem to appear and disappear without explanation. Often referred to as crystal cities, due to their geometric precision and reflective surfaces. These formations have been documented by deep-sea exploration vehicles in various locations around the world, particularly in the Western Pacific and parts of the Atlantic near the mid-ocean ridge. Unlike the ruins of known human civilizations, submerged by rising sea levels, these structures appear at depths that have been underwater for millions of years, in some cases more than 15,000 feet below the surface. They exhibit architectural features that would be impossible to construct using even modern technology, let alone ancient methods. What makes these formations particularly mysterious is their apparent transience. Expeditions, returning to previously documented sites, often find no trace of structures that were extensively photographed and mapped just months or years earlier. In other cases, massive complexes appear in locations that were empty when surveyed previously, with no signs of recent construction or placement. The structures themselves defy conventional explanation. They often feature perfect geometric forms, precise cubes, spheres, pyramids, and more complex polyhedra arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate design rather than natural formation. Many exhibit surfaces with mirror-like reflectivity, yet material samples, when they can be obtained, show compositions of ordinary stone or crystal formations that shouldn't naturally form in such perfect geometric shapes. Perhaps most puzzling is how these structures interact with light and sound. Deep-sea vehicles report that their sonar and mapping systems often malfunction in specific ways near these formations, with acoustic signals bouncing back in patterns that create three-dimensional projections in the water column above the structures. These acoustic holograms, as some researchers have called them, often depict complex, moving patterns that resemble marine life forms, but with anatomical features, unlike any known species. In 2015, a research submersible documented one of the most extensive crystal cities yet discovered, finding a complex covering approximately 3 square miles on the seafloor near the Mariana Trench. The formation featured concentric rings of crystal-like towers surrounding a central dome structure nearly 800 feet in diameter, all displaying perfect geometric symmetry that would be challenging to achieve even with advanced computer-aided design. Material analysis of a small fragment retrieved from the site showed it to be composed primarily of silicon dioxide, essentially quartz crystal, but with an impossible molecular structure that featured perfect alignment of crystal facets throughout the entire sample. According to the laws of crystallography, such uniform alignment cannot form naturally in specimens larger than a few centimeters, yet the structural pattern extended throughout formations hundreds of feet in size. When the research team returned to the same coordinates 8 months later with additional equipment to conduct more extensive studies, they found no trace of the formation. Sonar mapping showed only flat, featureless seafloor where the massive complex had stood. Sediment analysis gave no indication that anything had ever been moved or removed from the site. The seafloor appeared untouched, with silt patterns suggesting it had been undisturbed for centuries. Various explanations have been proposed for these vanishing crystal cities, from classified military installations, though the depths and locations make this highly implausible, to elaborate mineral formations that somehow self-assemble and disassemble under specific geothermal conditions. Some researchers have suggested they might represent a form of silicon-based life, enormous crystal organisms that grow, move, and reconfigure themselves on timescales too slow for us to observe directly, but fast enough to explain their appearance and disappearance between expeditions. Others propose even more exotic possibilities, suggesting the structures might be physical manifestations of higher dimensional objects intersecting with our three-dimensional reality, essentially projections from dimensions beyond our normal perception that appear and disappear as these intersections shift. Whatever their origin, the crystal cities represent one of the deep ocean's most beautiful and perplexing mysteries. They challenge our understanding of what can form naturally in the extreme conditions of the deep sea, what technology could create such structures at such depths, and even what remains permanently in our reality versus what might transiently appear from beyond it. They remind us that the seafloor, despite our increasingly detailed mapping efforts, remains in many ways as mysterious as the surface of distant planets, a realm where we can observe but often cannot explain, where the line between the natural and the impossible sometimes blurs beyond recognition. Let's now delve into one of the ocean's most unsettling acoustic mysteries, the phenomenon known as the whispers. First documented by naval vessels during World War II, the whispers are a specific type of underwater sound that manifest as what appear to be human voices, speaking just at the threshold of comprehensibility. Unlike most underwater sounds, which distort human speech patterns beyond recognition, these whispers maintain the rhythmic and tonal qualities of human language, creating the distinct impression of hearing a conversation in a language the listener almost but not quite understands. What makes the whispers particularly disturbing is their apparent responsiveness to human presence and activity. They typically begin shortly after human-operated vessels enter certain deep ocean regions, often starting as faint, distant sounds that gradually increase in volume and clarity as if approaching the listeners. In many documented cases, the whispers seem to respond to specific activities aboard the observing vessel, changing in tone and intensity when certain equipment is activated or when the crew discusses particular topics. This responsive quality creates the unsettling impression of being overheard and monitored by the source of the whispers. Naval psychologists initially dismissed the phenomenon as a form of auditory pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to interpret random sounds as familiar patterns, particularly voices. This explanation seemed plausible until multiple independent recording devices captured the same whisper patterns simultaneously, confirming they were objective acoustic phenomena rather than psychological misinterpretations. Acoustic analysis of these recordings has revealed several bizarre properties that defy conventional explanation. The whispers contain language-like patterns, with consistent phonemes, speech sounds that recur in what appear to be words and phrases, yet these patterns match no known human language, living or dead. Linguistic analysis suggests they have a complex grammatical structure similar to human language, with patterns that indicate syntax and semantics rather than random sounds. Most puzzling is how the whispers propagate through water in ways that violate normal acoustic principles. They maintain their clarity and intensity regardless of distance from the apparent source, show no normal degradation from water pressure or thermoclines, and can sometimes be heard inside sealed metal hulls without any direct physical pathway for sound transmission. In 1976, a research vessel in the mid-Atlantic recorded one of the most extensive whisper events on record, capturing over 30 minutes of what seemed to be multiple voices engaged in some form of exchange. The recording exhibited patterns suggesting turn-taking, questions and responses, and even emotional content ranging from what analysts described as curiosity to alarm, as the research team deployed various sampling devices into the water. Most disturbing was the final segment of the recording, in which the whispers seemed to begin repeating phrases the researchers themselves had spoken earlier that day, despite their conversations having occurred inside a closed laboratory compartment where no recording devices were active. Various theories have been proposed to explain the whispers, from previously unknown species of marine life with advanced vocalization abilities to some form of acoustic reflection phenomenon that captures, distorts, and returns human speech from elsewhere. Some researchers have suggested connections to unique properties of water molecules under extreme pressure, proposing that the oxygen-hydrogen bonds might temporarily store and release acoustic energy in patterns that mimic the original sounds that created them. Others have proposed more exotic explanations, suggesting the whispers might represent a form of communication from marine organisms or even systems that operate outside our conventional understanding of biology, perhaps collective consciousness phenomena emerging from the ocean itself. Declassified naval documents reveal that during the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarine commanders received standing orders for specific protocols if the whispers were encountered. These included immediate cessation of all unnecessary acoustic emissions, activation of specific still-classified countermeasure systems, and prompt departure from the area where the whispers were detected. The existence of these protocols suggests military researchers may have discovered connections between the whispers and effects on crew or equipment beyond what has been publicly acknowledged. Whatever their source, the whispers represent one of those profound boundary phenomena that exist at the intersection of acoustics, psychology, linguistics, and perhaps domains of reality we don't yet have frameworks to properly categorize. They suggest possibilities ranging from unknown intelligence in our oceans to properties of water itself that might, under certain conditions, create emergent phenomena mimicking consciousness. And they remind us that communication, if it exists beyond our species and familiar technologies, might take forms that seem simultaneously familiar in their patterns, yet utterly alien in their manifestation. The ocean speaks, it seems, in voices that sound almost human yet convey meanings beyond our current ability to translate or comprehend. Let's now explore one of the most puzzling visual phenomena reported by sailors and maritime aircraft pilots, the appearance of what have been termed ghost islands, or phantom landmasses. Throughout maritime history, there have been hundreds of documented cases of islands appearing on the ocean surface for periods ranging from hours to weeks before vanishing completely, leaving no trace of their existence. Unlike mirages, which are optical illusions that distort distant objects already present, ghost islands manifest as solid-appearing landmasses and locations where no land should exist according to all charts and surveys. They often appear substantial enough that ships have anchored off their shores, and landing parties have reportedly set foot on them, only to find the island completely gone when they attempt to return. What makes ghost islands particularly perplexing is the consistency of their appearances over time. The same phantom islands tend to reappear in the same locations repeatedly throughout history, often with decades or even centuries between sightings, yet with remarkably similar features each time they manifest. One of the most famous examples is Sandy Island, which appeared on maps between New Caledonia and Australia from 1774 until as recently as 2012, when a scientific expedition finally confirmed that no land exists at that location. For over 2 centuries, this island was repeatedly sighted, charted, and even reportedly visited by multiple independent voyagers, all describing similar features. Yet modern satellite imagery and depth soundings confirm the location has nothing but deep ocean, with no underwater mountain or geological formation that could possibly break the surface even during extreme low tides. Similar phantom islands have been reported in the North Atlantic, the South Pacific, and particularly in a region of the Indian Ocean, approximately 400 miles east of Madagascar, where a large island approximately 30 miles long has allegedly appeared and disappeared at least 7 times since the 16th century. Various theories have been proposed to explain ghost islands, from volcanic activity temporarily pushing land above the surface before it subsides again to massive mats of floating vegetation, or pumice from underwater eruptions that can mimic solid land. Some researchers have suggested they might result from methane hydrate deposits on the seafloor, which under certain pressure and temperature conditions could potentially rise to the surface, freeze into a solid form temporarily, and then dissipate as conditions change. But these explanations struggle to account for the consistency of specific ghost islands over centuries, their tendency to reappear in exactly the same locations with the same general features, and particularly the reports of landing parties who describe walking on seemingly solid ground with vegetation and sometimes even structures. In 1964, the captain of a Japanese fishing vessel reported anchoring off a small island not shown on any of his charts, approximately 200 miles east of the Philippines. He described a crescent-shaped landmass about 3 miles long with a central hill and sandy beaches. After observing it for several hours and confirming it was solid land through binoculars, he dispatched a small boat with 3 crew members to investigate. The landing party reported walking on solid ground, finding unusual black sand beaches and unfamiliar vegetation before returning to their boat with samples. When they returned to where their ship should have been anchored, they found only open ocean with no island and no ship in sight. After drifting for nearly 40 hours, they were rescued by a passing container vessel, which reported their ship had been found 80 miles away, with the remaining crew insisting the island had simply vanished while the landing party was ashore. Most bizarre of all, the physical samples brought back by the landing party's sand and plant specimens gradually lost mass over the following days until they disappeared entirely, leaving empty containers. Some oceanographers have proposed that ghost islands might represent a rare form of mass hallucination triggered by specific combinations of atmospheric conditions, electromagnetic anomalies, and psychological factors common to isolated groups at sea. This would explain why entire crews can share the same detailed perception of islands that objectively don't exist. Others have suggested more exotic possibilities, including the temporary intersection of parallel realities or the manifestation of land masses that exist primarily in another dimension but become briefly perceptible in ours under certain conditions. Whatever their explanation, ghost islands represent one of those maritime phenomena that challenge our most basic assumptions about the stability and reliability of physical reality. They suggest the possibility that the boundary between the objectively real and the seemingly impossible might be more permeable than our conventional worldview acknowledges. And they remind us that, despite our satellites, our sonar mapping, and our constant surveillance of the ocean surface, the seas can still sometimes show us things that shouldn't be there and then take them away again, leaving us to question what we really saw and what it means for our understanding of the world. Let's now turn our attention to a particularly bizarre oceanic phenomenon that blurs the line between biology and geology, the so-called living islands or biomorphic islands, occasionally reported in remote parts of the Pacific. Unlike ghost islands, which appear and disappear without explanation, living islands persist for extended periods but exhibit properties that no landmass should possess, most notably, apparent movement against prevailing currents and changes in overall shape and size that occur too rapidly to be explained by normal erosion or accretion. The earliest scientific documentation of this phenomenon comes from the journals of naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who in 1858 described encountering a small island in the Banda Sea that local indigenous people insisted had moved several miles over the previous decade. Initial scientific dismissal of these claims as superstition gave way to puzzlement when Wallace's own measurements, compared with earlier Dutch maritime charts, confirmed a displacement of nearly 7 miles from the island's previously recorded position. More recent documentation comes from satellite tracking, which has identified several small islands in the South Pacific that appear to change position by up to several hundred meters per year, moving in patterns that sometimes directly oppose prevailing ocean currents. What makes living islands particularly perplexing is their internal structure, which defies conventional geology. Core samples taken from several of these islands have revealed what appears to be a complex network of vessel-like channels running throughout the seemingly solid rock, filled with a fluid that bears chemical similarities to blood, including hemoglobin-like compounds capable of carrying oxygen. The outer layers of these islands often consist of what researchers have termed responsive rock, stone, that exhibits properties normally associated only with living tissue, including limited regeneration after damage and structural changes in response to environmental stimuli, like temperature fluctuations or wave patterns. Perhaps most bizarre are the patterns of energy consumption and waste production that some living islands exhibit. Thermal imaging shows temperature differentials consistent with metabolic processes, rather than passive heating and cooling, while water samples taken from around these islands show unusual concentrations of compounds that appear to be metabolic waste products, chemically similar to those produced by known marine organisms, but on a vastly larger scale. In 2004, a research expedition to a suspected living island in the South Pacific reported that their attempt to establish a permanent monitoring station was thwarted when the rocky outcropping they had selected for mounting their equipment slowly but perceptibly moved away from their anchored vessel overnight, traveling approximately 30 meters against both wind and current. The team leader described the movement as deliberate and purposeful, like an animal avoiding something it perceives as threatening. Various theories have been proposed to explain living islands, from vast colonial organisms, similar to coral reefs, but capable of limited mobility, to something more akin to enormous single organisms that incorporate inorganic materials into their structures, creating a hybrid of living tissue and rock. Some marine biologists have suggested they might represent an entirely different evolutionary approach to life, organisms that operate on timescales so much slower than conventional animals that their movements and life processes appear geological rather than biological to human observers. Others have proposed that they might not be single entities at all, but rather emergent systems where countless smaller organisms work together in such perfect coordination that they effectively function as a single superorganism capable of directed movement and response. Whatever their nature, living islands represent one of the most profound challenges to our traditional categorization of life and non-life. They suggest the possibility that the boundary between the organic and inorganic, between individual and collective, might be far more permeable than our conventional biological models acknowledge. And they raise the fascinating possibility that some of what we consider the solid, unchanging geography of our ocean floors might in fact be alive in ways we're only beginning to recognize, not simply covered with life or shaped by living processes, but itself living on scales and through mechanisms that have remained largely invisible to our understanding. They remind us that life, as we continue to discover throughout our explorations of extreme environments, is far more versatile, adaptable, and perhaps fundamentally different from our traditional conceptions than we ever imagined. Now let's explore one of the ocean's most enduring and terrifying legends, the phenomenon sailors have historically called the summons of the deep. Unlike the more general summons we discussed earlier, which affects individuals who feel called into the water, this specific phenomenon affects entire vessels simultaneously, creating what survivors describe as an overwhelming compulsion shared by all aboard to deliberately sail towards specific coordinates, often in direct opposition to their intended course and despite clear danger. Historical maritime records contain dozens of documented cases where ships under full crew control suddenly altered course without orders, heading directly toward remote ocean locations where no land, resources, or other vessels would provide any logical destination. In many of these cases, crew members report acting against their own conscious will, unable to countermand their hands as they adjusted navigation equipment and controls to maintain the unwanted course. What makes the summons of the deep particularly disturbing is the apparent intelligence behind it. The compulsion doesn't simply draw vessels toward a fixed point, but seems to adjust its pull based on vessel capabilities, weather conditions, and even attempted countermeasures by those aboard who recognize what's happening. It creates the unsettling impression of being purposefully drawn toward something that wants you specifically, not just any passing ship. In 1952, a merchant vessel in the mid-Pacific radioed its home port, reporting that it had fallen under some influence that was forcing it off course toward a specific point in the open ocean, despite the crew's attempts to resist. The ship's last transmission included the captain's observation that as they approached the coordinates, drawing them, sonar was showing an immense object rising from the ocean floor, something miles across that shouldn't be there and isn't on any chart. No trace of the vessel or its 28 crew members was ever found despite an extensive search, and subsequent oceanographic surveys of the location showed only flat, featureless seafloor with no evidence of the massive structure reported in the final transmission. Similar incidents have been reported by vessels that managed to break free from the summons, typically when engine failure or other mechanical problems prevented them from reaching whatever destination was pulling them. These survivors report the compulsion suddenly lifting once it became impossible for them to continue, suggesting whatever intelligence might be behind the phenomenon recognizes when a target becomes unreachable and redirects its attention elsewhere. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from unusual electromagnetic fields affecting the human brain and possibly electronic equipment, to infrasound generated by certain underwater geological features that might induce specific psychological and neurological effects in humans exposed to it. Some researchers have suggested connections to documented cases of mass hysteria or folie à deux shared psychosis, proposing that the isolated environment of ships at sea might amplify psychological contagion effects, allowing one person's delusion or compulsion to spread rapidly to others in the closed environment. But these explanations struggle to account for how the summons affects electronic navigation equipment that should be immune to psychological influences, or why the phenomenon consistently directs vessels towards specific oceanic coordinates rather than random directions. More controversial theories propose the summons might represent a form of communication or influence from intelligent entities in the deep ocean, whether previously unknown marine species with advanced psychological capabilities or something more exotic. This hypothesis suggests the summons might be a form of luring behavior analogous to how anglerfish attract prey, but operating through psychological rather than visual attraction, and at a scale encompassing entire vessels rather than individual organisms. Whatever its cause, the summons of the deep represents one of the ocean's most directly threatening mysteries, a phenomenon that seems to deliberately target human vessels with what appears to be predatory intent. It suggests the possibility that something in the ocean might view our ships not merely as objects passing over its domain, but as potential prey to be actively hunted and captured, through means we barely comprehend. And it embodies one of humanity's oldest and most primal fears about the sea, that beneath the waves lurks something not merely dangerous through indifference to our existence, but actively hostile to it, something that sees our ventures onto the ocean as intrusions into its territory, and responds accordingly. It reminds us that despite our technological mastery of maritime travel, the ocean remains a realm where human control can be tenuous, and where forces we don't fully understand may sometimes reach up to draw us down into depths from which there is no return. Let's now explore a particular bizarre temporal phenomenon reported in certain ocean regions, what mariners have traditionally called lost time or time slips. Since at least the 18th century, there have been documented cases of vessels encountering anomalous temporal effects while traversing specific ocean areas, particularly in parts of the North Atlantic, the South Pacific, and a region of the Indian Ocean approximately 300 miles east of Madagascar. In these incidents, ships report experiencing dramatic discrepancies between their chronometers and astronomical time, arriving at destinations days or even weeks earlier or later than should be possible given their speed and departure date. What makes these temporal anomalies particularly perplexing is that they can't be explained by simple mechanical failure or human error in timekeeping. Modern vessels experiencing these phenomena report that multiple independent timing systems, electronic, mechanical, and astronomical, all show the same discrepancy, suggesting a genuine alteration in the flow of time itself rather than mere measurement error. In 1979, a well-documented case involved a Japanese research vessel that departed Tokyo on May 10th, followed a normal course to Seattle, and arrived on what the crew believed to be May 20, first 11 days after departure, exactly as scheduled. Upon docking, they discovered it was actually June 7th, 17 days later than their instruments and logs indicated. Every timepiece aboard the ship showed the same incorrect date, despite being based on different technologies and having no physical connection to each other. The crew's journal entries continued uninterrupted, with no missing pages or gaps in memory, yet somehow they had experienced only 11 days of subjective time while 28 days had passed in the outside world. Even more bizarrely, the ship had consumed fuel and supplies consistent with an 11-day journey, not the 28-day trip that objectively occurred according to shore-based observations. The opposite effect has also been reported, with vessels arriving at destinations far sooner than should be physically possible, given their maximum speed and distance traveled. In 1992, a cargo vessel traveled from Perth, Australia to Cape Town, South Africa, a journey that typically takes at least 14 days at the ship's maximum speed, in what appeared to be just under 6 days. The crew was unaware of any anomaly until arrival, believing they had been at sea for a normal duration, yet their vessel appeared in Cape Town waters less than a week after documented departure from Perth. What makes these time slips particularly disturbing is how they affect human biology. Crew members on vessels experiencing temporal acceleration, covering distances faster than normally possible, often show physiological markers inconsistent with their subjective experience. Their bodies age, hair and nails grow, and cellular processes advance as if they had experienced the full objective time, even though their conscious experience and memories encompass only the shortened period. Conversely, crews on vessels affected by temporal deceleration, taking longer than they subjectively experience, often show biological markers of only their subjective time, with less aging and cellular change than should have occurred over the longer objective period that passed. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from localized gravitational anomalies that might dilate time according to relativistic principles, to possibilities involving the theoretical concept of gravity waves that might temporarily alter the relationship between matter and the space-time continuum. Some physicists have suggested these phenomena might represent naturally occurring versions of what theoretical physics calls wormholes, shortcuts through space-time that might allow matter to traverse distances or time periods more quickly than normal physical laws would permit. Others have proposed connections to quantum entanglement effects operating at macroscopic scales, suggesting that, under certain conditions, entire vessels might become quantum entangled with distant points in space-time, creating effects that appear to violate our conventional understanding of temporal progression. Whatever their cause, oceanic time slips represent one of the most fundamental challenges to our understanding of reality itself. They suggest that time, which we typically experience as an absolute and unchanging flow, might under certain conditions become plastic, compressible, or expandable in ways that transcend our current physical models. And they raise profound questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical time. How can crews experience continuous, uninterrupted subjective time that differs dramatically from the objective time passing in the world around them? These temporal anomalies remind us that the ocean might not merely contain unknown creatures or unusual physical phenomena, but might under certain conditions become a place where the fundamental constants and laws we take for granted no longer apply in the ways we expect. They suggest that our models of reality, developed primarily from observations made on land under normal conditions, might be incomplete when applied to the alien environment of the deep ocean under extreme or unusual circumstances. Now let's explore one of the most visually spectacular yet scientifically perplexing ocean phenomena, the appearance of what mariners have traditionally called sea cathedrals. These are massive architectural-looking structures of light that occasionally appear in the open ocean, typically at night and often during stormy conditions. Unlike the more common and understood Elmo's fire or bioluminescent displays, sea cathedrals manifest as enormous, geometrically precise formations that extend from the ocean surface up into the sky, sometimes reaching heights of several hundred feet. They resemble Gothic cathedrals or ancient temples constructed entirely of luminous energy, complete with pillars, arches, domes, and what appear to be intricate decorative elements, all glowing with a pale blue-white light that witnesses describe as both beautiful and profoundly unsettling. What makes sea cathedrals particularly mysterious is their apparent solidity and permanence during the time they manifest. Unlike most atmospheric light phenomena, which shift and change with wind or clouds, these structures maintain their precise geometric forms, regardless of surrounding conditions, sometimes remaining perfectly stable for hours before suddenly vanishing all at once. They cast reflections on the water surface that match exactly what would be expected from physical structures of the same shape and size, creating the visual impression of massive architectural works that are somehow both present and not physically substantial. One of the most extensively documented sea cathedral appearances occurred in 1973, when the crew of a Norwegian cargo vessel observed a massive luminous structure approximately half a mile off their starboard side during a storm in the North Sea. The captain, engineers, and most of the crew witnessed the phenomenon, which persisted for nearly 3 hours before disappearing instantaneously. Photographs taken during the event show a clearly defined structure resembling a massive Gothic cathedral, composed entirely of blue-white light, with architectural details including flying buttresses, a central spire, and what appeared to be intricate window patterns along its sides. Physical measurements taken during the event yielded bizarre results. Radar showed solid returns from the location, indicating the presence of a physical structure despite its apparent composition of pure light. Temperature readings taken from the ship showed a pronounced cold spot centered on the cathedral, with air temperature dropping by nearly 20 degrees Celsius in its immediate vicinity. Most puzzling were the electromagnetic readings, which showed powerful field fluctuations synchronized with subtle changes in the cathedral's luminosity, as if the structure were somehow breathing or pulsing with energy in a regular rhythm. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from complex interactions between electrical storms and the ocean surface, creating previously undocumented forms of plasma, to the possibility that certain geological formations on the seafloor might, under specific electromagnetic conditions, project energy fields that become visible as structured light. Some researchers have suggested connections to piezoelectric effects in quartz-rich seafloor sediments, proposing that pressure changes during storms might generate electrical fields that manifest visually under certain atmospheric conditions. Others have proposed more exotic possibilities, including the idea that sea cathedrals might represent a form of interdimensional bleed-through, places where structures or energies from another reality briefly become visible in our world without fully materializing within it. This would explain their apparent solidity to instruments like radar while remaining insubstantial to physical interaction. Whatever their cause, sea cathedrals represent one of the ocean's most beautiful and enigmatic mysteries. They challenge our understanding of how light, electricity, and matter interact in the marine environment. They suggest the possibility that under certain conditions, energy can organize itself into complex, apparently designed structures without any obvious physical mechanism to create or maintain such organization. And they remind us that the boundary between the material and the immaterial, between energy and form, might under certain conditions become more permeable than our conventional scientific models would predict. The ocean, it seems, can sometimes birth cathedrals of light that exist somewhere between imagination and reality, between the physical and the energetic, between the natural and what appears to be deliberately designed. They stand as luminous temples on the water, challenging our concepts of what is possible and what is not, before returning to whatever mystery spawned them, leaving witnesses changed by their beauty and their profound strangeness. Let's now turn our attention to a phenomenon that blurs the boundaries between the ocean and the sky, what meteorologists and mariners have called the ocean mirror or maritime sky reflections. Since at least the early 19th century, sailors have reported rare but recurring incidents where the sky above certain ocean regions appears to perfectly reflect what lies beneath the water's surface, creating the unsettling visual effect of seeing the ocean floor, underwater structures, and marine life projected onto the clouds or clear air above. Unlike normal mirages, which distort and invert images along the horizon through well-understood atmospheric refraction, ocean mirrors project detailed, accurate images of underwater features that should be invisible from the surface due to depth, water clarity, or viewing angle. What makes this phenomenon particularly perplexing is that it often reveals structures or marine life that later investigation confirms actually exist, but which were unknown at the time of the sighting and couldn't possibly have been visible through normal means. In 1857, the crew of a British survey vessel near the Chagos Archipelago in the Indian Ocean reported seeing perfect images of coral formations, shipwrecks, and what appeared to be ruins of structures projected onto unusually flat, gray clouds above the water. The captain noted in his log that these features were displayed upon the sky, as if upon a great gray canvas, showing details that no human eye could discern through the depth of water that must lie above them. When underwater exploration technology finally allowed the area to be properly surveyed over a century later in the 1960s, researchers were stunned to discover coral formations in a previously unknown shipwreck in exactly the positions and forms depicted in the detailed sketches from the 1857 observation. More recent documented cases include a 1989 incident off the coast of Yucatan, where the crews of 3 separate vessels observed what appeared to be perfect aerial projections of underwater Mayan ruins that hadn't yet been discovered by archaeologists. Photographs taken during the event show clearly recognizable Mayan architectural features projected onto an otherwise clear sky, including details of carvings and structures that were later confirmed when the actual ruins were discovered in underwater surveys conducted in the early 2000s. Various scientific explanations have been proposed for ocean mirrors, from complex atmospheric optics involving multiple layers of temperature inversion that might theoretically allow light reflected from the ocean floor to be trapped and projected upward, to the possibility that certain electromagnetic conditions might temporarily allow water to become transparent to specific wavelengths of light that are normally absorbed. Some researchers have suggested connections to quantum phenomena, such as macroscopic entanglement, proposing that under specific conditions, light particles interacting with underwater features might become entangled with particles in the atmosphere, creating a form of quantum television that projects information across the intervening space. Others have proposed more exotic possibilities, including the idea that ocean mirrors might represent a form of naturally occurring holographic projection, where information about underwater structures is somehow encoded and projected through mechanisms we don't yet understand. What makes ocean mirrors particularly significant is how they challenge our understanding of both optics and information transfer. They suggest the possibility that information about underwater environments might travel through channels or mechanisms outside our current scientific models. And they raise profound questions about the relationship between different parts of our world. How can information from the ocean depths appear in the sky with such clarity and detail, bypassing all the physical limitations that should make such transfer impossible? Perhaps most unsettling is how ocean mirrors seem to selectively display features of particular historical or archaeological significance, as if deliberately revealing specific information rather than randomly projecting whatever happens to lie beneath. This apparent selectivity has led some researchers to propose that rather than being purely physical phenomena, ocean mirrors might represent a form of information sharing or communication from an unknown source or intelligence. Whatever their cause, ocean mirrors represent one of those boundary phenomena that exist at the intersection of oceanography, atmospheric science, optics, and potentially domains of reality we don't yet have frameworks to properly categorize. They remind us that the ocean and atmosphere, which we typically study as separate systems, might interact in ways far more complex and information-rich than our current models acknowledge. And they suggest that information itself, about what exists in different parts of our world, might sometimes flow through channels we haven't yet identified, revealing hidden aspects of reality in ways that seem magical, but may eventually find explanation in expanded scientific paradigms. They stand as luminous puzzles written on the sky, windows briefly opening between worlds, we thought separate, challenging us to expand our understanding of how information, light, and matter interact in the complex system that is our planet. Now let's explore one of the ocean's most disturbing biological mysteries, the phenomenon marine biologists have termed synchronous mutations or leap evolution events. Since the early 2000s, researchers have documented multiple incidents where marine species in specific ocean regions suddenly and simultaneously develop identical genetic mutations that would normally take thousands of generations of evolutionary pressure to appear. Unlike normal evolution, which occurs gradually through natural selection, acting on random variations, these events involve multiple unrelated species simultaneously developing the same highly specific genetic changes, often resulting in new physical features or capabilities that appear literally overnight. What makes synchronous mutations particularly perplexing is their apparent response to environmental threats or changes that haven't yet occurred. In several documented cases, marine species have simultaneously developed genetic adaptations to specific environmental conditions, days or weeks before those conditions actually manifested in their habitat. In 2011, marine biologists studying coral reef ecosystems near Fiji documented one of the most dramatic synchronous mutation events on record. Over a period of approximately 72 hours, 17 different species, including fish, mollusks, and crustaceans, with no close evolutionary relationship to each other, all developed identical genetic modifications to their respiratory systems. These modifications, which appeared in nearly 100% of the population simultaneously, significantly enhanced their ability to extract oxygen from water with high carbon dioxide levels. 5 days after these mutations appeared, a previously unknown underwater volcanic vent system activated near the reef, flooding the surrounding water with carbon dioxide and creating precisely the conditions the mutations had prepared for. Without these adaptations, most species in the affected area would likely have suffocated as the sudden CO2 influx depleted available oxygen. Yet because of the anticipatory mutations, populations remained stable with minimal loss of life. Similar incidents have been documented in the Arctic Ocean, where multiple species simultaneously developed genetic changes that increased their tolerance to specific industrial pollutants, weeks before a previously unknown illegal dumping operation began releasing those exact compounds into their environment. Conventional evolutionary theory cannot explain such anticipatory, multi-species genetic changes occurring simultaneously, especially when they prepare organisms for threats that don't yet exist at the time the mutations appear. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that extremely subtle environmental precursor signals might trigger genetic changes through epigenetic mechanisms, to the hypothesis that certain marine bacteria might act as a biological communication network, detecting environmental threats and triggering adaptive responses in multiple host species simultaneously. Some researchers have suggested connections to the emerging field of quantum biology, proposing that DNA itself might have quantum properties that allow it to respond to probability fields rather than just current conditions, essentially reading likely future states and adapting preemptively. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, suggesting that marine ecosystems might possess a form of collective intelligence or information processing capability that transcends individual organisms. In this view, the ocean itself might function as a kind of distributed nervous system, with water serving as both medium and message in a planetary scale biological communication network. Whatever their explanation, synchronous mutations represent one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of how life adapts and evolves. They suggest the possibility that evolution, which we typically view as a blind, mechanistic process operating through random variation and selection, might under certain conditions involve elements of anticipation, coordination, and even apparent purpose that transcend our current biological models. And they raise fascinating questions about the nature of information transfer in biological systems. How can multiple unrelated species simultaneously know about threats that haven't yet manifested, and coordinate their genetic responses in ways that prepare them for specific future conditions? These evolutionary leaps remind us that life in the ocean might operate according to principles more complex and interconnected than our current biological framework acknowledges. They suggest possibilities ranging from undiscovered mechanisms of environmental sensing and genetic regulation to more profound revisions in how we understand the relationship between information, time, and biological adaptation. The ocean, it seems, sometimes allows its creatures to change in ways that seem to anticipate the future, not through gradual selection, but through sudden, coordinated leaps that transcend the boundaries between species and challenge our most fundamental assumptions about how life responds to its environment. Let's now explore one of the most puzzling oceanographic mysteries, the phenomenon researchers have termed hydrological anomalies, or more colloquially, impossible water. Since advanced chemical analysis techniques became available in the mid-20th century, oceanographers have occasionally discovered water samples with properties that violate our understanding of how H2O should behave under given conditions of temperature, pressure, and salinity. These anomalous water samples exhibit bizarre properties, such as refusing to freeze even at temperatures dozens of degrees below normal freezing point, maintaining perfect clarity despite containing concentrations of particulates that should render them opaque, or demonstrating surface tension hundreds of times stronger than normal water. What makes these hydrological anomalies particularly perplexing is their stability, unlike most chemical or physical anomalies, which tend to normalize quickly when removed from extreme conditions. Impossible water maintains its unusual properties indefinitely, sometimes for years after collection, regardless of how it's stored or treated. In 1979, an oceanographic expedition in the South Pacific collected water samples from a previously uncharted deep-sea trench that demonstrated one of the most dramatic hydrological anomalies ever documented. The water, despite chemical analysis confirming it was H2O with normal seawater salinity, maintained a liquid state at temperatures as low as -57 degrees Celsius, -70 degrees Fahrenheit, refused to boil even when heated to 188 degrees Celsius, 370 degrees Fahrenheit, and exhibited a density approximately 30% greater than should be possible for water under any conditions. Most bizarrely, organisms placed in this water didn't die despite the extreme chemical and physical conditions it represented. Instead, they appeared to thrive, showing accelerated growth, enhanced cellular repair, and in some cases development of entirely new biological capabilities. When researchers attempted to analyze the molecular structure of this impossible water, they discovered patterns of hydrogen bonding that shouldn't be stable under Earth's gravitational and electromagnetic conditions. The water molecules had organized themselves into complex lattice structures, more resembling crystal formations than normal liquid arrangements, yet maintained full fluid properties. These structures appeared to be actively maintained rather than passively stable, reorganizing themselves when disturbed in ways that suggested some form of information processing capability within the water itself. Similar anomalous water samples have since been discovered in several other deep ocean locations, particularly near hydrothermal vent systems, underwater volcanic formations, and certain regions with unusual magnetic properties. In each case, the water exhibits properties that should be mutually exclusive, combining aspects of solids, liquids, and sometimes even gases in ways that violate fundamental principles of chemistry and physics as we understand them. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that extreme pressure and temperature conditions in certain deep-sea environments might force water molecules into exotic phases not recognized in our current models of matter, to the hypothesis that certain rare elements or compounds found only in specific ocean trenches might catalyze fundamental changes in how hydrogen and oxygen atoms bond. Some researchers have suggested connections to theoretical exotic states of matter predicted by quantum physics but never before observed in natural conditions, proposing that certain unique combinations of pressure, temperature, and electromagnetic fields in the deep ocean might create conditions that allow water to enter these exotic states. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, suggesting that water itself might possess capabilities for self-organization and structural memory beyond what our current chemical models recognize, particularly when exposed to extreme conditions over geological timescales. Whatever their explanation, hydrological anomalies represent one of the most fundamental challenges to our understanding of chemistry and physics. They suggest the possibility that even H2O, the molecule we consider most familiar and well understood, might, under certain conditions, behave in ways that transcend our current scientific models. And they raise profound questions about the nature of matter itself. How can a substance maintain properties that our physical laws define as mutually exclusive? How can liquid water simultaneously demonstrate characteristics of crystals, fluids, and even in some cases, living systems? These impossible waters remind us that the deep ocean creates conditions unlike anything we encounter in our normal experience. Extreme pressures, unusual electromagnetic fields, absolute darkness, and isolation from other environmental influences for millions of years. Under such conditions, even the most fundamental substances of our world might develop properties beyond what our current scientific framework can readily explain. The ocean, it seems, can transform even water itself into something that challenges our most basic assumptions about how matter behaves and what is physically possible in our universe. Now let's explore one of the most philosophically profound ocean mysteries, the phenomenon marine biologists have termed ecological synchronicity or biospheric resonance. Since the development of sophisticated global monitoring systems in the late 20th century, researchers have documented multiple incidents where marine ecosystems thousands of miles apart, with no direct physical connection or communication, simultaneously exhibit identical behavioral changes across hundreds of different species. Unlike normal migrations or seasonal behaviors, which follow predictable patterns based on environmental cues, these synchronicity events involve multiple unrelated species, suddenly altering their behavior in identical ways despite experiencing different local conditions. What makes ecological synchronicity particularly perplexing is the precision and simultaneity of these changes. In documented cases, marine creatures from different oceans have been observed changing behavioral patterns at literally the same moment, as if responding to some global signal undetectable by our instruments. In 2008, marine research stations around the world recorded one of the most dramatic synchronicity events ever documented. At precisely the same moment, 3:27 UTC, on April 17th, observers at 41 different locations across all of Earth's major oceans reported that multiple marine species suddenly altered their behavior in identical ways. Migratory species changed direction mid-journey, nocturnal species became diurnal, territorial species abandoned their territories, and creatures that normally inhabit shallow waters suddenly dove to greater depths, all simultaneously across the planet. This global behavior shift lasted exactly 17 hours before all species returned to their normal patterns at precisely 20:27 UTC on the same day. No unusual physical or chemical changes were detected in any of the affected ocean regions during this period. No seismic activity, solar flares, magnetic field fluctuations, or other known phenomena occurred that could explain such a planet-wide biological response. It was as if every affected creature had received the same instruction at the same moment, followed it for a precisely defined period, then received a second instruction to return to normal behavior. Similar, though, less dramatic synchronicity events have been documented dozens of times since global monitoring became sophisticated enough to detect them, typically lasting between 3 and 24 hours and affecting between 50 and 500 different marine species simultaneously. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that subtle geomagnetic fluctuations below our current detection threshold might trigger synchronized responses in magnetically sensitive marine organisms, to the hypothesis that certain low-frequency acoustic signals might propagate through the ocean's sound channel to reach distant regions simultaneously. Some researchers have suggested connections to quantum entanglement theories, proposing that marine life may be connected through quantum biological mechanisms that allow instantaneous information sharing regardless of distance. This would explain the perfect simultaneity of responses observed in even the most widely separated populations. Others have proposed more holistic explanations, suggesting that Earth's oceans might function as a single integrated system with emergent properties of self-organization and communication that transcend individual organisms or regional ecosystems. In this view, the global ocean itself might possess characteristics analogous to a distributed nervous system, capable of transmitting information and coordinating responses across planetary distances. Whatever their explanation, ecological synchronicity events represent one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of biology and information transfer in living systems. They suggest the possibility that life in the oceans might be connected through mechanisms beyond our current scientific models, channels of communication that operate instantaneously across vast distances and transcend the boundaries between species and ecosystems. And they raise fascinating questions about consciousness and intelligence in biological systems, not just individual consciousness, as we typically understand it, but potentially forms of distributed or collective awareness that might emerge from the interactions of countless organisms across an entire planetary system. These synchronicity events remind us that the ocean might not merely contain countless separate living things, but might in some sense function as an integrated living system in its own right. One with capabilities for communication, coordination, and response that transcend the limitations of any individual organism within it. The ocean, it seems, sometimes speaks with a single voice that all its creatures hear simultaneously, regardless of distance or difference, a planetary conversation we can observe but not yet understand or participate in. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most surreal mysteries, the phenomenon that oceanographers and sailors have called temporal reefs or chronological shoals. First documented scientifically in the late 1960s, but present in maritime folklore for centuries. These are physical formations that appear to exist simultaneously in multiple time periods, showing different states of development, decay, or historical context depending on when and how they are observed. Unlike normal geological features that change gradually over time through erosion, accretion, or tectonic activity, temporal reefs appear to exist in multiple stages of their history at once, shifting between these states in ways that defy our linear understanding of time. What makes temporal reefs particularly perplexing is their physical consistency within each observed time state. They aren't mere visual illusions or hallucinations. They can be physically interacted with, sampled, photographed, and measured, with all observations within a single temporal state, showing perfect consistency. Yet the same location observed hours or days later might show a completely different physical reality, equally consistent within itself, but representing what appears to be a different point in the feature's history. In 1972, a research vessel in the Caribbean documented one of the most thoroughly studied temporal reef phenomena. The ship discovered a small island approximately 2 miles long that wasn't marked on any charts, despite being in a well-traveled area. Initial survey showed a volcanic formation with young rock, minimal erosion, and early-stage pioneer vegetation, consistent with an island perhaps 100 years old. After anchoring overnight, the research team awoke to find the same island had transformed, now showing extensive erosion, mature forest, and even the ruins of what appeared to be colonial-era stone structures, suggesting hundreds of years of development and human habitation. The following day, the island appeared in yet a third state, now showing signs of advanced erosion, partially submerged sections, and vegetation patterns consistent with a formation in the final stages of subsidence back into the ocean. On the fourth day, the island had vanished completely, with sonar showing only flat ocean floor, with no evidence any formation had ever existed there. Throughout this progression, all scientific instruments functioned normally. Multiple team members independently confirmed each state of the island through direct observation, photography, and physical samples collected from shore. Each sample remained stable after collection, maintaining the properties consistent with whatever temporal state they had been collected from, even as the island itself continued its progression through different phases of its apparent history. Similar temporal anomalies have been documented in other oceanic regions, particularly in the South Pacific, parts of the Indian Ocean, and in a region of the North Atlantic approximately 250 miles east of Bermuda. In each case, the affected formations appear to cycle through different stages of geological development, sometimes including evidence of human presence from different historical periods. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain geological formations might somehow record and replay their own history through mechanisms involving crystalline structures with information storage properties, to theories involving localized distortions in space-time that might allow different temporal states to manifest physically under specific conditions. Some physicists have suggested connections to quantum superposition principles operating at macroscopic scales, proposing that certain geological features might exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously, with observers effectively collapsing the probability wave to experience one state at a time. Others have proposed more exotic possibilities, including the idea that some oceanic regions might experience temporal tides, periodic fluctuations in the normal flow of time that temporarily bring past or future states into physical manifestation in our present. Whatever their explanation, temporal reefs represent one of the most fundamental challenges to our understanding of time itself. They suggest the possibility that time, which we experience as a linear progression from past to future, might under certain conditions operate in more complex patterns, cycles, spirals, or even simultaneous manifestations of multiple temporal states. And they raise profound questions about the relationship between time and physical reality. How can the same physical location manifest different historical states that are tangible, measurable, and consistent within themselves? These temporal anomalies remind us that our experience of time as an absolute, unidirectional flow might be a limited perspective rather than a fundamental truth about reality. The ocean, with its vast age, extreme conditions, and isolation from many of the factors that stabilize our terrestrial experience, might occasionally reveal glimpses of time's true nature, more fluid, cyclical, and perhaps even simultaneous than our normal experience suggests. Let's explore another of the ocean's most enduring and frightening mysteries, the phenomenon known as the midnight water or dark tides. Documented in scientific literature since the 1970s, but present in maritime folklore for centuries, the midnight water is a rare oceanic event where normal seawater is temporarily replaced by a substance that appears physically identical to water but behaves according to entirely different properties. Unlike normal seawater, the midnight water absorbs light completely, rather than reflecting or refracting it, creating the visual impression of absolute darkness, regardless of external lighting conditions. It maintains a temperature precisely at freezing regardless of ambient conditions, resists all normal forms of wave formation, even in strong winds, and most disturbingly, appears to increase in density and viscosity when disturbed, actively resisting any attempt to move through it. What makes the midnight water particularly terrifying is its apparent ability to spread or infect normal water upon contact, gradually converting it to share the same anomalous properties. In documented cases, these dark regions have been observed expanding across the ocean's surface at rates of up to several square miles per hour, creating ever larger areas where normal maritime physics simply cease to function. In 1987, a fishing vessel off the coast of Chile reported encountering a patch of midnight water approximately half a mile in diameter. The captain described it as a perfect circle of absolute darkness that remained completely black even when illuminated by the ship's most powerful spotlights. When the vessel's bow entered this dark region, the engines immediately stalled, despite showing normal function on all gauges and indicators. The crew reported that the ship came to a complete stop as if it had hit a wall of invisible concrete, despite there being no physical barrier visible or detectable by sonar. Most disturbing was the crew's observation that the dark water began slowly climbing the hull of the vessel, like a living thing trying to board, rising several feet above the normal waterline, in defiance of gravity and surface tension principles. The ship was only able to break free when an unexpected storm generated waves powerful enough to push it back into normal waters, after which the engines immediately restarted without any mechanical intervention. Similar incidents have been reported in the North Atlantic, parts of the Pacific, and with particular frequency in a region of the Southern Ocean, approximately 1,000 miles west of the Antarctic Peninsula. In each case, the midnight water demonstrates the same core properties: total light absorption, freezing temperature regardless of surrounding conditions, resistance to wave formation, and increased density when disturbed. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain rare underwater volcanic processes might temporarily release substances that change the chemical composition of surface water, to theories involving suspended nanoparticles that might alter the optical and physical properties of seawater through mechanisms not yet understood. Some researchers have suggested connections to theoretical exotic states of matter predicted by quantum physics, proposing that under specific conditions involving temperature, pressure, and electromagnetic fields, water molecules might temporarily reorganize themselves into alternative structural configurations with dramatically different properties. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, suggesting the midnight water might represent a form of phase-shifted matter, physically present in our reality, but operating according to physical laws from another dimensional framework. This would explain why it appears to violate so many fundamental principles of how water should behave. Whatever its explanation, the midnight water represents one of the ocean's most directly threatening mysteries, a phenomenon that not only defies our understanding of chemistry and physics, but actively endangers vessels and crews who encounter it. It suggests the possibility that under certain conditions, even the most fundamental substance of our oceans can transform into something that operates according to entirely different principles, not merely an anomaly or exception to known rules, but potentially something governed by a different set of physical laws entirely. And it embodies one of humanity's most primal fears about the sea, that it might contain or generate substances utterly alien to our experience, things that reject not just our presence, but the very physical principles upon which our technology and survival depend. The midnight water reminds us that the ocean, despite centuries of exploration and scientific study, remains in many ways as alien and potentially hostile an environment as distant space. A realm where even the most basic elements we think we understand might sometimes transform into something utterly beyond our comprehension or control. Let's now explore one of the most mathematically perplexing ocean mysteries, the phenomenon researchers have termed Fibonacci waters or golden ratio currents. First documented scientifically in the 1990s, using satellite imaging and advanced current tracking technology. These are ocean current systems that spontaneously organize themselves into perfect mathematical patterns, following the Fibonacci sequence and golden ratio proportions. Unlike normal ocean currents, which form based on temperature differentials, wind patterns, the Coriolis effect, and other well-understood physical forces, Fibonacci waters create current patterns that seem mathematically perfect rather than naturally evolved, as if they had been precisely designed according to advanced geometric principles. What makes Fibonacci waters particularly perplexing is their stability and perfect mathematical precision. They maintain exact golden ratio proportions despite crossing regions with different temperatures, salinities, and depths, factors that should disrupt or distort any current pattern according to standard oceanographic principles. In documented cases, these current systems form perfect logarithmic spirals, precisely nested Fibonacci sequences, or exact golden angle distributions that maintain their mathematical perfection regardless of the surrounding oceanic conditions. In 2006, satellite oceanographers documented one of the most dramatic Fibonacci water formations ever recorded, observing a current system in the South Atlantic that spontaneously organized into a perfect logarithmic spiral spanning nearly 300 miles. The spiral maintained exact golden ratio proportions between each successive curve, with water flowing along these mathematically perfect pathways, despite crossing regions with temperature differentials of up to 15 degrees Celsius and depth variations from surface to over 3,000 feet. Most bizarrely, the entire spiral rotated as a unified structure, completing one full rotation every 24 hours, regardless of the different speeds at which water should have moved through different parts of the system, according to normal fluid dynamics. It was as if the mathematical pattern itself somehow controlled the water's movement, rather than being a result of it. The formation maintained this perfect mathematical structure for 17 days before suddenly dissolving back into normal current patterns, with no apparent external trigger for either its formation or dissolution. Similar mathematical current patterns have been observed in parts of the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and with particular frequency in a region of the North Atlantic, approximately 500 miles west of the Azores. In each case, the currents organize themselves according to precise mathematical principles that should be impossible in natural fluid systems, subject to the complex and variable forces of the open ocean. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain interactions between Earth's magnetic field and electrically conductive seawater might create previously undocumented organizing forces, to theories involving subtle planetary scale standing waves that might impose geometric patterns on ocean currents through resonance effects. Some researchers have suggested connections to emerging theories in quantum fluid dynamics, proposing that oceanic systems large enough to bridge the quantum classical divide might display self-organizing properties similar to those observed in superfluids and Bose-Einstein condensates. Others have proposed more holistic explanations, suggesting that these mathematical patterns might represent a form of emergent order arising from the ocean as an integrated system, a manifestation of organizing principles that operate at scales beyond our current scientific frameworks. Whatever their explanation, Fibonacci waters represent one of the most philosophically significant ocean mysteries. They suggest the possibility that mathematical principles we typically consider abstract human concepts might in fact be organizing forces that can directly shape physical reality under certain conditions. And they raise profound questions about the relationship between mathematics and the physical world. Is mathematics merely a human-created system for describing reality, or does it represent something more fundamental that can actually drive physical systems to organize themselves according to its principles? These perfect mathematical currents remind us that the ocean, with its vast scale and integration of countless physical, chemical, and biological processes, might manifest emergent properties that transcend the sum of its parts. They suggest the possibility that at certain scales or under certain conditions, pure mathematical relationships might become active organizing principles rather than just descriptive tools. The ocean, it seems, sometimes flows according to perfect mathematical harmonies that exist independently of the physical forces we typically consider sufficient to explain its movements, as if some deeper order occasionally emerges from beneath the apparent chaos of waves and weather to reveal glimpses of a more fundamental mathematical nature to reality itself. Let's now delve into one of the most disturbing biological mysteries of the deep ocean, the phenomenon marine biologists have termed convergent evolution events, or more colloquially, deep copies. Since the development of deep-sea exploration technology in the mid-20th century, researchers have occasionally discovered marine species in the abyss that appear to be perfect biological replicas of surface-dwelling creatures, despite having no genetic relationship or evolutionary connection to them. Unlike normal cases of convergent evolution, where unrelated species develop similar features due to similar environmental pressures, deep copies represent exact duplications of entire organisms, identical in appearance, behavior, internal anatomy, and even specific unique features that serve no apparent adaptive purpose. What makes deep copies particularly perplexing is their exactness and specificity. They don't just resemble surface species in general ways that might be explained by similar environmental adaptations. They duplicate them precisely, down to ornamental features, color patterns that would be invisible in the darkness of the deep ocean, and even vestigial structures that serve no function in either environment. In 1978, a deep-sea research expedition discovered one of the most striking examples of this phenomenon while exploring an abyssal trench in the Western Pacific at a depth of approximately 18,000 feet. The team encountered a species of fish that appeared to be identical in every visible respect to the common clownfish, Amphiprion ocellaris, a reef-dwelling species that normally lives in shallow tropical waters and depends on symbiotic relationships with anemones. Laboratory analysis later confirmed that this deep-sea duplicate had identical external morphology, internal organ arrangement, and even the same distinctive orange and white striping pattern as its surface counterpart, despite living in an environment of total darkness where such coloration would serve no conceivable evolutionary purpose. Most bizarrely, the deep-sea version even performed the same distinctive swimming movements and anemone-tending behaviors as surface clownfish, despite the complete absence of anemones in its abyssal environment. Yet genetic analysis showed no close relationship between the two species. They belonged to entirely different taxonomic families and had apparently evolved separately for at least 30 million years. Similar deep-sea duplicates have since been discovered for dozens of surface-dwelling species, including various reef fish, certain crustaceans, and even specific species of marine mammals, with each deep copy showing the same pattern of perfect morphological duplication without genetic relationship. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain environmental factors in the deep ocean might somehow constrain evolutionary pathways to produce specific forms, regardless of genetic starting points, to theories involving horizontal gene transfer mechanisms that might allow genetic information to move between unrelated species. Some researchers have suggested connections to emerging theories in morphogenetic field biology, proposing that physical forms in living systems might be influenced by field-like organizing principles that can operate independently of genetic coding, potentially allowing similar forms to emerge from different genetic foundations. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, suggesting that the deep ocean, with its extreme isolation, pressure, and darkness, might in some sense function as a biological echo chamber that somehow replicates or reflects organisms from other ocean regions through mechanisms completely outside our current understanding of biology. Whatever their explanation, deep copies represent one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of evolutionary biology and the relationship between genetics and physical form. They suggest the possibility that the shapes living things take might be determined by factors beyond just genetic inheritance and environmental selection, that some other principle or process might be involved in determining biological forms. And they raise fascinating questions about the nature of information transfer in biological systems. How can organisms with no genetic relationship and no direct contact develop identical forms down to specific details that serve no apparent adaptive purpose? These biological duplicates remind us that life in the deep ocean might develop according to principles more complex and mysterious than our current evolutionary models acknowledge. They suggest that, in the extreme conditions of the abyss, the normal rules governing the relationship between genetics, environment, and physical form might operate differently or be supplemented by other organizing principles we've yet to identify. The ocean depths, it seems, sometimes produce perfect copies of life from above, like biological reflections in a dark mirror, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about how living things come to be the way they are. Now let's explore one of the most visually spectacular yet scientifically perplexing ocean phenomena, what mariners and oceanographers have called living lightning or biological thunderstorms. Unlike normal bioluminescence produced by plankton or bacteria, living lightning manifests as massive organized displays of light that mimic the patterns, movements, and even the apparent electrical properties of atmospheric lightning, but occur entirely underwater and are biological rather than electrical in origin. What makes living lightning particularly mysterious is its scale, organization, and apparent intelligence. These displays can span miles of ocean, involve billions of individual organisms acting in perfect coordination, and often respond to external stimuli in ways that suggest centralized control rather than the simple chemical triggers that drive normal bioluminescent reactions. In documented cases, living lightning has been observed forming perfect geometric patterns, responding to ship movements as if tracking them intentionally, and even replicating complex sequences like mathematical progressions or symbolic forms that should be beyond the organizational capabilities of any known marine life. In 2010, a research vessel in the Indian Ocean documented one of the most dramatic living lightning events ever recorded, observing a display that extended over approximately 7 square miles of ocean surface. The phenomenon began with what appeared to be normal bioluminescence, small flashes and glows from plankton disturbed by wave action. Within minutes, however, these random flashes organized themselves into a massive, perfectly symmetrical pattern resembling an enormous branching structure, similar to lightning, but with a level of organization and geometric precision that no natural electrical discharge could achieve. Most bizarrely, this luminous structure began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern that mathematicians aboard the research vessel recognized as a binary representation of the first 50 digits of pi. When the ship altered course to approach the center of the display, the entire light pattern shifted in response, maintaining the same distance from the vessel, regardless of its movements, as if deliberately avoiding closer inspection. The display maintained its organization for nearly 3 hours before dissipating, with the final phase showing what observers described as a sequential shutdown, each branch of light extinguishing in perfect sequence from smallest to largest, like a carefully orchestrated performance rather than a natural phenomenon randomly fading. Similar living lightning displays have been documented in parts of the Pacific, the Caribbean, and with particular frequency in a region of the Southern Ocean known as the Bioluminescence Zone, approximately 700 miles east of New Zealand. In each case, the light displays exhibit organization, responsiveness, and pattern complexity, far beyond what should be possible from collections of simple marine organisms with no central nervous system or communication mechanism. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain species of bioluminescent organisms might possess currently unknown communication methods, allowing rapid coordination across large distances, to theories involving symbiotic relationships between bioluminescent bacteria and larger marine creatures that might provide the organizational intelligence to coordinate these displays. Some researchers have suggested connections to slime mold organisms, which despite lacking brains have demonstrated remarkable problem-solving abilities and can organize themselves to navigate mazes or create efficient networks. Perhaps oceanic equivalents with bioluminescent capabilities might explain the organizational complexity observed in living lightning. Others have proposed more exotic possibilities, including the idea that these displays might represent a form of communication from the ocean itself, an emergent property arising from the collective activity of billions of simple organisms that temporarily achieves a level of intelligence transcending its individual components. Whatever their explanation, living lightning displays represent one of the ocean's most beautiful and perplexing mysteries. They challenge our understanding of how simple organisms can coordinate their activities across vast distances with precise timing and organization. They suggest the possibility that marine life might possess communication mechanisms far more sophisticated than our current biological models acknowledge. And they raise profound questions about the nature of intelligence itself. Can collections of simple organisms without centralized brains achieve levels of coordinated complexity that mimic or even exceed what we consider intelligent behavior? These living light storms remind us that intelligence in the ocean might take forms radically different from our land-based, vertebrate-centered conception of what awareness and purposeful action look like. They suggest the ocean might occasionally manifest emergent properties that resemble consciousness at scales, and through mechanisms entirely unlike our familiar models of mind and intention. The sea, it seems, sometimes lights up with displays that blur the boundary between simple biological reaction and something that looks remarkably like intelligent communication, written in light across miles of open water, speaking in patterns we can recognize but cannot yet fully understand. Let's now explore one of the most philosophically challenging ocean mysteries, the phenomenon that oceanographers and cognitive scientists have termed aquatic memory or hydrological imprinting. First scientifically documented in the late 1990s, but present in maritime folklore for centuries, aquatic memory refers to instances where seawater appears to retain and later replay information from events it has witnessed, creating what amounts to three-dimensional, sensory recordings of past occurrences that can be experienced by humans who later enter the same waters. Unlike hallucinations or subjective experiences, these memory events can be simultaneously perceived by multiple unrelated observers, recorded on scientific instruments, and often contain historically verifiable information that was unknown to any of the witnesses. What makes aquatic memory particularly perplexing is its specificity and accuracy. The replayed events aren't vague impressions but detailed recreations, often including visual, auditory, and even tactile elements that create the experience of directly witnessing something that occurred in the past, sometimes centuries earlier. In 2003, a marine archaeology team working on a shipwreck site off the coast of Portugal documented one of the most extensively studied aquatic memory events. While diving near the remains of a 16th century Portuguese carrack, all 7 team members simultaneously experienced what they described as a complete sensory immersion in what appeared to be the final moments before the ship sank. They reported seeing the intact vessel, crew members moving about the deck, and hearing voices speaking archaic Portuguese, with all team members later independently providing identical descriptions of specific individuals, activities, and even snippets of conversation. Most remarkably, the dive team recorded several names and details from their shared experience, which subsequent historical research confirmed were accurate but had not been included in any of the previously available records of the shipwreck that the team had studied before their dive. The information included the name of the ship's surgeon, who was described as wearing a distinctive red cap and was seen treating an injured sailor on the foredeck. Details later verified in a previously untranslated journal discovered in a Portuguese archive months after the diving expedition. Similar memory events have been documented at other significant maritime locations, particularly sites of shipwrecks, naval battles, or other dramatic occurrences where intense human emotions were likely present during the original events. In each case, multiple independent witnesses report nearly identical experiences of witnessing past events, often including historically verifiable details that were not previously known to them. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain properties of water molecules might allow them to record and store information through structural arrangements of hydrogen bonds, to theories involving quantum entanglement that might allow information to be preserved and later accessed through mechanisms similar to those being explored in quantum computing. Some researchers have suggested connections to the emerging field of water memory studies, where preliminary research has indicated that water exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies can retain and later reproduce those same frequency patterns under certain conditions. Perhaps extreme emotional or high-energy events might similarly imprint electromagnetic patterns on water that can later trigger specific neural responses in humans, exposed to that same water. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, suggesting that consciousness itself might have properties that can directly interact with and imprint upon the physical world, with water serving as a particularly effective medium for storing such imprints due to its molecular structure and quantum properties. Whatever their explanation, aquatic memory events represent one of the most profound philosophical challenges to our understanding of information, consciousness, and the physical world. They suggest the possibility that the physical medium of water might function as something akin to a natural recording device, capturing and preserving information about events in ways that transcend our current models of physical information storage. And they raise fascinating questions about the nature of time, memory, and experience itself. How can information from the past be preserved with such fidelity that others can experience it as if directly witnessing the original events? What does this suggest about the relationship between consciousness, information, and the physical world? These watery memories remind us that the ocean, which has witnessed the entire history of life on Earth and the full span of human maritime activity, might in some sense remember what it has seen. They suggest the possibility that water itself, the substance from which all life emerged and within which much of Earth's history has unfolded, might preserve aspects of that history in ways we're only beginning to recognize. The ocean, it seems, might be not merely the setting for Earth's drama, but in some sense its witness and recorder, holding memories of what has transpired within it that can, under certain conditions, be accessed and experienced by those who enter its depths. Let's now explore one of the most technologically disruptive ocean mysteries, the phenomenon engineers and maritime technologists have termed the silence zone or electronic deadwaters. First documented by military vessels during the Cold War, but kept classified until the early 2000s, the silence zone refers to specific ocean regions where all electronic and mechanical technology suddenly and completely ceases to function, without any detectable cause or warning. Unlike electromagnetic pulse, EMP effects or known forms of electronic interference, which typically damage equipment permanently, technology affected by the silence zone returns to normal function as soon as it leaves the affected area, with no evidence of damage or explanation for the temporary failure. What makes the silence zone particularly perplexing is its selectivity and apparent intelligence. In documented cases, the effect doesn't simply disable all technology indiscriminately, but often affects specific systems in sequence, creating the unsettling impression of deliberate examination rather than random interference. Even more bizarrely, mechanical systems that should be immune to electromagnetic interference, like wind-up chronometers, diesel engines with mechanical injection systems, or simple spring-powered devices, also cease to function when entering these zones. In 1983, a NATO research vessel, equipped with specialized electromagnetic monitoring equipment, documented one of the most comprehensive silence zone encounters while conducting underwater acoustic studies in the mid-Atlantic. The ship first noticed its satellite communications failing, followed in sequence by radar, sonar, radio, internal electrical systems, and finally all combustion engines, despite the latter being mechanically isolated and theoretically immune to electromagnetic interference. Most disturbing was the pattern of system failures, which engineers aboard described as resembling a methodical examination. Each system would fail, remain inactive for exactly 30 seconds, then reactivate for precisely 10 seconds before failing again. This pattern repeated through all onboard systems, in order of technological complexity, from most advanced to most basic, creating what the chief engineer described as the unmistakable impression of something systematically testing and cataloging our technology. When the ship drifted out of the affected area approximately 2 hours later, all systems spontaneously returned to normal function, with no evidence of damage or explanation for the failures. Diagnostic testing showed no residual effects whatsoever. It was as if the shutdowns had never occurred. Similar electronic dead zones have been documented in parts of the Pacific, the South Atlantic, and with particular frequency in a region approximately 400 miles northwest of the Galapagos Islands. In each case, vessels report the same pattern of sequential system failures, temporary restoration, and complete recovery upon leaving the affected area. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain geological formations on the seafloor might generate unusual electromagnetic field configurations capable of interfering with technology, to theories involving localized distortions in quantum field properties that might affect the fundamental physical principles upon which electronic and mechanical systems operate. Some researchers have suggested connections to theoretical exotic plasma states that might form under specific oceanographic conditions, creating electromagnetic properties capable of interfering with technology in ways that current scientific models don't account for. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, including the possibility that these zones might represent deliberate technological testing by unknown intelligence, whether human advanced military technology or something more exotic. Whatever their explanation, silence zones represent one of the ocean's most directly challenging mysteries to human technological mastery. They suggest that despite our sophisticated understanding of electronics, electromagnetics, and mechanical engineering, there may be conditions or forces in the ocean environment capable of completely neutralizing even our most advanced and robust technologies. And they raise profound questions about our reliance on technology in maritime environments. If conditions exist that can render all our systems simultaneously inoperative without warning or remedy, how secure is our mastery of the oceans really? These electronic deadwaters remind us that the ocean, despite centuries of exploration and scientific study, may still harbor properties or phenomena completely outside our current physical models, forces capable of suspending the technological systems upon which modern maritime activity depends. The sea, it seems, can sometimes create spaces where human technology simply ceases to function, reminding us of how tenuous our control over this alien environment truly is, regardless of how sophisticated our ships and instruments may become. Now let's explore one of the most unsettling ocean mysteries, the phenomenon marine biologists and maritime psychologists have termed the collective nightmare or synchronized marine visions. Documented scientifically since the late 1970s, but reported in maritime records for centuries. These are incidents where multiple individuals aboard vessels in certain ocean regions simultaneously experience identical vivid hallucinations or visions, often of a disturbing or threatening nature. Unlike mass hysteria or shared delusions, which typically spread through social contagion, these collective experiences occur simultaneously across all affected individuals, regardless of whether they're in visual or verbal contact with each other. What makes the collective nightmare particularly perplexing is its consistency across different ships, time periods, and cultures. The same specific visions tend to recur in the same geographic locations, sometimes across decades or even centuries, affecting people with no knowledge of previous incidents or cultural connection to earlier witnesses. In 1987, a cargo vessel crossing the South Pacific documented one of the most extensively studied collective nightmare events. At precisely 3:17 a.m. local time, all 27 crew members simultaneously experienced the same vivid hallucination, regardless of whether they were awake or asleep at the time. Each reported seeing the ocean around the ship transform into what appeared to be an enormous face or mass composed of water, with features described consistently as ancient, not human, but humanoid, and expressing a profound and terrible sadness. The vision lasted exactly 72 seconds for all observers before vanishing, leaving the ocean normal in appearance. When interviewed separately and without knowledge of each other's accounts, all 27 crew members provided nearly identical descriptions of the entity, including specific details such as eyes like whirlpools, a mouth that seemed to contain another ocean inside it, and most disturbingly, all reported hearing the same phrase spoken directly into their minds: "You sail upon my ancient corpse." Medical examination showed unusual but identical brainwave patterns in all crew members for several hours following the incident, despite their having different baseline neurological profiles before the event. Similar collective visions have been reported by vessels passing through specific ocean regions, particularly in parts of the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and a region of the Atlantic, approximately 600 miles east of the Bahamas. In each location, the specific content of the vision remains consistent across different ships and time periods, suggesting some location-specific trigger rather than random hallucination. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain underwater geological features might release hallucinogenic compounds that affect human neurology in specific ways, to theories involving infrasound generated by ocean floor features that might induce particular brain states and visual hallucinations. Some researchers have suggested connections to electromagnetic anomalies in certain ocean regions that might directly affect the human brain's temporal and occipital lobes, potentially creating shared visual experiences among people exposed to the same field patterns. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, including the possibility that certain intense emotional or psychological events might somehow imprint themselves on the physical environment, creating a kind of psychic residue that can be picked up by sensitive individuals or by people whose consciousness is altered by the specific conditions of that location. Whatever their explanation, collective nightmares represent one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of consciousness, perception, and their relationship to physical environment. They suggest the possibility that under certain conditions, multiple human minds might perceive the same non-physical information simultaneously, raising questions about whether such shared visions represent hallucinations in the conventional sense or potentially the perception of something that exists in a way our normal conceptual frameworks don't accommodate. And they raise fascinating questions about the relationship between location and experience. Why do specific visions consistently recur in specific geographic areas, sometimes across centuries? What properties might certain ocean regions possess that could trigger identical subjective experiences in different people at different times? These shared oceanic visions remind us that human consciousness itself remains in many ways as mysterious as the deep ocean. They suggest the possibility that the boundary between mind and environment, between the subjective and the objective, might under certain conditions become more permeable than our conventional understanding acknowledges. The ocean, it seems, sometimes speaks directly to human consciousness, creating experiences that are simultaneously personal and collective, subjective and consistent across different observers, phenomena that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of perception and reality itself. Let's now turn our attention to one of the most terrifying oceanic phenomena, what mariners throughout history have called predatory water or hunter's currents. Unlike normal ocean currents, which flow according to predictable patterns based on temperature, wind, the Coriolis effect, and other well-understood forces, predatory water appears to move with deliberate intent, actively pursuing specific vessels and adapting its movement to counter-evasive maneuvers. What makes predatory water particularly disturbing is its apparent intelligence and persistence. These currents don't simply flow in unusual patterns. They actively track specific ships, adjust their course to intercept vessels trying to escape them, and demonstrate behavior that creates the unmistakable impression of hunting rather than random movement. In documented cases, predatory water has been observed, splitting to surround vessels, accelerating to overtake fleeing ships, and even appearing to set ambushes by creating calm areas that lure vessels into positions where escape becomes impossible. In 1998, a fishing trawler in the North Atlantic documented one of the most comprehensive encounters with this phenomenon. The captain first noticed an unusual current pattern approaching his vessel from the southeast, a narrow, fast-moving stream of water, visibly different in color and texture from the surrounding ocean. When he altered course to avoid this strange current, it immediately changed direction to intercept the new course. This pattern repeated through 7 course changes over 3 hours, with the current adjusting each time to pursue the vessel regardless of its direction. Marine biologists aboard noted that all sea life appeared to have vacated the area, creating an unnatural emptiness in waters normally teeming with fish and seabirds. When the ship's engines were pushed to maximum speed in an attempt to outrun the phenomenon, the current visibly accelerated, moving at a speed oceanographers later calculated to be nearly 3 times faster than any natural current ever recorded in that region. Most disturbing was the current's behavior when it finally reached the vessel. Rather than simply flowing past as normal water would, it circled the ship in a tightening spiral pattern, creating a whirlpool effect that began to pull the vessel downward despite its powerful engines working at full capacity. The ship was saved only when an unexpected storm front moved through the area, disrupting the current pattern and allowing the vessel to escape. Similar predatory current behaviors have been documented in parts of the Pacific, the South Atlantic, and with particular frequency in a region of the Indian Ocean known to local fishermen as the Hunter's Sea, approximately 300 miles southwest of Sumatra. In each case, the currents demonstrate the same pattern of deliberate pursuit, adaptation to evasion attempts, and behavior that creates the impression of intentional hunting. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain complex interactions between ocean thermoclines, magnetic anomalies, and tidal forces might create current patterns that coincidentally mimic purposeful movement, to theories involving previously undocumented forms of massive marine life that might generate powerful water movements as they travel. Some oceanographers have suggested connections to emerging research on self-organizing fluid systems, proposing that under specific conditions, ocean currents might develop complex feedback mechanisms that create behavior patterns resembling biological responses without actual consciousness behind them. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, including the possibility that water itself, when present in sufficient quantity and under specific conditions, might develop emergent properties that resemble purposeful action, not consciousness as we understand it, but a more fundamental form of environmental response that manifests as apparently directed behavior. Whatever their explanation, predatory water currents represent one of the ocean's most directly threatening mysteries. They suggest the possibility that the medium in which ships travel, water itself, might under certain conditions become actively hostile rather than merely passively dangerous. And they embody one of humanity's oldest and most primal fears about the sea, that it is not merely an environment indifferent to human life, but potentially an active predator, something that hunts us specifically when we venture into its domain. These hunting currents remind us that despite all our technological mastery of maritime travel, we move through an alien medium that operates according to principles we still don't fully understand. The ocean, it seems, might sometimes organize itself to pursue human vessels with what appears to be deliberate intent, currents that hunt like predators, water that moves with purpose and apparent malevolence. Let's explore one final ocean mystery, the phenomenon researchers have called the last transmission or ghost radio signals. Since the advent of wireless communication technology in the early 20th century, vessels and coastal stations have occasionally received radio transmissions that defy conventional explanation, strong signals from ships that investigation later reveals had sunk years or even decades earlier. Unlike normal radio anomalies, like atmospheric skip or equipment malfunctions, these ghost transmissions contain specific, verifiable information unknown to the receivers, and often include voices of crew members, identified by name and confirmed to have been aboard the vessels when they were lost. What makes the last transmission particularly disturbing is the consistency and specificity of these communications. They aren't garbled or fragmentary, but clear, coherent messages that follow proper maritime communication protocols. They often reference specific details about the vessel's condition, location, or circumstances that are later verified through historical records or marine archaeology. In 1975, a coastal radio station in Norway documented one of the most thoroughly investigated ghost transmission cases when it received a distress call from the SS Cotopaxi, a vessel that had vanished in the Bermuda Triangle in 1925. The transmission, received on a closed military frequency that had not been used for commercial traffic since World War II, included the ship's correct call sign, the name of its actual historical captain, W.J. Meyer, and specific details about a water leak in the cargo hold that was causing the ship to take on water. Most disturbing was that the transmission occurred exactly 50 years to the day after the Cotopaxi's disappearance, and contained information about the nature of the leak that had not been included in any historical records of the incident, but was later confirmed when marine archaeologists finally discovered the wreck in 2020. Similar ghost transmissions have been received from dozens of lost vessels, particularly ships that disappeared under mysterious circumstances or with significant loss of life. In many cases, the transmissions occur on anniversary dates of the vessel's disappearance, often at the exact time they were last heard from. Various scientific explanations have been proposed, from the possibility that certain atmospheric conditions might occasionally capture and later replay radio transmissions that were sent but never received during the original incident, to theories involving quantum entanglement that might allow information to exist in a state of temporal superposition, occasionally manifesting in our present. Some communications engineers have suggested connections to emerging research on electromagnetic field memory, proposing that intense emotional states during the original transmission might somehow imprint the signal more deeply into the Earth's electromagnetic field, allowing it to resurface under specific atmospheric or geomagnetic conditions. Others have proposed more radical hypotheses, including the possibility that what we perceive as linear time might occasionally experience folds or overlaps that allow direct communication between different periods, particularly during moments of extreme stress or emotion. Whatever their explanation, ghost radio transmissions represent one of the most hauntingly personal ocean mysteries. They suggest the possibility that final moments of ships lost at sea might somehow echo across time, that last desperate calls for help might continue to propagate through dimensions or aspects of reality we don't fully understand. And they raise profound questions about the nature of information, consciousness, and time itself. Can the final thoughts, words, and experiences of those lost at sea somehow persist beyond their physical existence? Can moments of extreme emotion or desperate need somehow break through the normal barriers of time and space to reach across decades or centuries? These transmissions from ships long lost remind us that the ocean's mysteries extend beyond the physical realm into questions about the very nature of reality, consciousness, and what might persist when human lives are claimed by the sea. They suggest that the boundary between past and present, between those lost and those still sailing, might occasionally become permeable in ways that our conventional understanding of physics and communication cannot readily explain. The voices of those lost at sea, it seems, might sometimes still reach us across the decades, final words that arrive long after the speakers and their vessels have vanished beneath the waves. And with that final mystery, we've completed our journey through the ocean's darkest secrets. We've explored crushing depths where bizarre creatures thrive in eternal darkness. We've examined disappearing ships, underwater sounds that defy explanation, and waters that sometimes seem to hunt with deliberate intent. We've considered time slips, ghost transmissions, and waters that remember what they've witnessed. Through it all, one thing remains clear. The ocean, despite centuries of exploration and scientific study, remains in many ways as mysterious and alien as distant space. For every secret we uncover, 10 more questions emerge from the darkness. For every creature we document, dozens more likely remain undiscovered in the crushing depths. The ocean is a world of extremes, extreme pressure, extreme darkness, extreme cold, conditions that have shaped life and physical processes in ways we're only beginning to understand. It's a realm where our technology remains limited, where our presence is always temporary and tenuous, and where the line between the known and the unknown, the possible and the impossible, sometimes blurs beyond recognition. As we continue to explore this alien world that covers most of our planet, we can expect to find more mysteries, more impossibilities, more phenomena that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about how reality works. The ocean will continue to surprise us, to frighten us, and occasionally to take those who venture too far into its darkness. Its secrets will continue to haunt our dreams and fire our imaginations. And perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be fully solved, some depths not meant to be completely illuminated. Perhaps the ocean's greatest gift to us is the reminder that our knowledge will always be incomplete, our mastery always partial, our understanding always evolving, that there will always be something waiting in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our instruments and our comprehension. Something ancient and vast and utterly alien, yet part of our own world. Something watching as we skim across its surface or dive briefly into its shallows before returning to the thin envelope of air that sustains us. Something that was here long before humans evolved and will likely remain long after we're gone. If you've stayed with me through this long exploration of the ocean's darkest mysteries, I want to thank you. I hope these stories have sparked your imagination and perhaps given you a new appreciation for just how strange and wonderful our world truly is. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown depths, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations of our world's greatest mysteries. Leave a comment about which ocean mystery you found most fascinating or terrifying. Or share your own unexplained experiences if you've ever encountered something strange during your time near the sea. Until next time, remember that the greatest mysteries aren't in distant galaxies or parallel dimensions, but right here on our own planet beneath the waves that crash on shores around the world. The ocean is calling, with its siren song of undiscovered wonders and unexplained phenomena. The question is, are you brave enough to listen? Sleep well, dream of the deep, And remember, we've only just begun to scratch the surface of what lies beneath.